Though often called the Bermuda Triangle's little cousin, the Alaska Triangle is probably better considered the big cousin. Covering a vast region that links Anchorage, Juneau, and Utqiagvik, this eerie expanse has witnessed over 20,000 disappearances since the 1970s, averaging a staggering 2,250 vanishings each year. That's more than 6 per day and far exceeds the Bermuda Triangle's infamous track record. So, what's going on here? Could it be the pull of unexplained magnetic forces? The work of extraterrestrial beings? A shroud of political intrigue? Or is it just the harsh wilderness, unpredictable weather conditions, and rugged terrain, combined with the unholy vastness and remoteness that famously characterize Alaska? Today, we'll be looking at why so many people steer clear of Alaska, other than the cold, and how, though such an empty and inhospitable place, it came to be known at all. Alaska's name is derived from the Aleut word Alyeska, meaning the Great Land, and the name is fitting. Covering an area of around 665,000 square miles, Alaska is the largest state in the USA. It's so massive, it's equal in size to 1/5 of the rest of the USA. To put that into perspective, if you placed Alaska over a map of the lower 48 states, it would stretch all the way from Georgia to California. And of the almost 12,300 miles of coastline in the entire US, around 6,600 of them, over 50%, belong to Alaska. Alaska is about as unknown to humans as the world's oceans. Despite having over 365 million acres, human civilization has only settled 160,000 acres of it. That's less than 1/20th of 1% of the state, making it almost completely undiscovered. Alaska is truly the last great wilderness in the United States. The state so big that even if you could see 1 million acres of it every day, it would still take you a year to see the whole thing. So what's actually in Alaska if there's so little human settlement? First of all, mountains. Alaska is an extremely rugged and mountainous territory. It boasts 17 of the 20 highest mountains in the US, including North America's tallest peak, Mount McKinley, which stands at over 20,200 feet high. Alaska's mountains compose 3 main ranges: the Brooks Range, the Alaska Range, and the Aleutian Range, which stretches out far into the Pacific Ocean. Below and between these mountain ranges lie dense forests, glaciers, and tundra, a kind of biome where tree growth is hindered by freezing temperatures and short growing seasons. Alaska is also a land of many lakes and rivers. The state has 40% of the United States' water resources within its bounds. The 86,000 square mile area of Alaska that is covered by water could fit the city of Los Angeles 183 times, or Minnesota once. Of the 3 million natural lakes to be found in Alaska, around 3,200 are officially named. Its 12,000 rivers taken all together run a total of 365,000 miles through the landscapes, and less than 1%, or around 3,100 miles of these, are officially designated as wild and scenic. And that's just the liquid water. As for the frozen kind, well, it just so happens that 5% of Alaska, or 29,000 square miles of it, sits under glaciers. We're talking about around 100,000 glaciers. That's over half of all of the glaciers the world over. As a state that is far more wild than tame, the Alaska State Park System is the largest in the United States by far, with 3.2 million acres to its name. And the Wrangell St. Elias National Park and Preserve in Alaska, covering 13.2 million acres, is the biggest national park in the country and can fit Yellowstone in it 6 times over. And so, unsurprisingly, the biggest state park in the United States, Wood-Tikchik State Park, is also in Alaska. Comprising 1.6 million acres of wilderness, the park is over 8 times the size of New York City. With such quantities of frozen and flowing water, and the tundras and high mountains making up Alaska's geography, it is characterized by what can only be called an extreme climate and environment. In North America, Alaska ranks easily among the highest on the list of places prone to extreme weather. Temperatures in the winter can go as low as 60 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, or 26 below zero Celsius. It's one of the many barriers Alaska poses to permanent and even temporary human settlement. You'd be forgiven for thinking, well, that's just the winter, half the year. Doesn't it warm up later? But unfortunately, in Alaska, the cold obeys other laws than what most of us come to expect as normal. The effects of the cold temperatures influence the Alaskan environment throughout the year. An impressive 85% of Alaska is covered by permafrost, permanently frozen ground. Some of the top surface of the permafrost does thaw and freeze periodically with the seasonal variation in sunlight, and that, as we'll see later, is for us another place where problems start. It'll make some sense then that Alaska has an extremely small human population, given such climatic conditions, but the same doesn't go for wildlife. Most of America's salmon, crab, halibut, and herring come from Alaska. And while grizzly bears in the lower 48 states have been considered a threatened species since 1975, there's no such problem in Alaska, where there's over 32,000 grizzlies. In the whole of the lower 48 states, there are fewer than 2,000 bears remaining, while in Alaska, there's one grizzly bear for every 21 people. Alaska isn't just defined by its geographical enormity or its astounding wildlife. What truly sets it apart is its emptiness. Despite its massive size and natural wonders, Alaska feels almost untouched, with astonishingly little human settlement dotting its vast, rugged landscapes. This state, the biggest in the US by far in physical size, is one of the smallest when considering its human population. There are only around 730,000 people living in Alaska, almost 500,000 less than the population of Rhode Island, the smallest US state. The population density of Alaska is 1 person per square mile, making Alaska the state with easily the lowest population density of all the others. By comparison, the average for the rest of the nation is 98 people per square mile. The density of Wyoming, a notoriously empty state, is still 6 times higher than that of Alaska. Statistically speaking, this makes Alaska one of the loneliest and emptiest places for a human to live in. While the population density gives us an average of how few humans there are in the whole state, the reality is even more extreme. Over 80% of people living in Alaska live in urban areas, and of these, most live in just a few cities: Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau, the capital of Alaska. And though these are technically cities, their populations pale in comparison to the great American cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. In California, there are 258 cities larger than Juneau, and for Californians, most of these cities are towns, neighborhoods even. In fact, only 3 settlements in Alaska are home to more than 10,000 people. Just under 40% of Alaskans live in Anchorage, the largest city in Alaska, and a little under 9% of Alaskans live in Juneau and Fairbanks, meaning that around half of Alaskans live in these 3 cities. If it's starting to seem like a lonely place, this is just the tip of the iceberg. What makes Alaska even more remote and isolated is just how inaccessible it is. A great number of its cities and towns can only be reached by boat or plane. This is the case for Juneau, the only capital in the US that isn't accessible by car. And the roads themselves in Alaska are remarkably few and far between. In fact, there are only 17,000 miles of roads in Alaska. Ranked among other US states, only New Hampshire, Vermont, Delaware, Rhode Island, Hawaii, and the District of Columbia have fewer road miles than Alaska. By comparison, Texas, the second largest state in the US, has the most road miles of any state, clocking in at over 650,000 miles. California, the third biggest state, comes in second place with just under 400,000 road miles. The United States has a total of 8.4 million road miles, of which only 0.4% are on Alaskan territory. This means that Alaska, despite the enormous area it covers, is one of the most inaccessible places on the planet. And this isn't exactly done by choice. In fact, the climate, remote location, and low population of Alaska pose road construction and maintenance problems that simply don't exist at lower latitudes. As an Alaskan saying goes, in Alaska, there are only 3 seasons: winter, breakup, and road construction. Stay tuned, and you'll find out why in just a moment. Alaskans are therefore forced to use airplanes, seaplanes, and boats for transportation and shipping. Even though the weather often makes this a laborious task, it means that a lot of the Alaskan summer is spent importing produce to sustain the population during the winter months, where shipping and transport are reduced once more by the forces of nature. In fact, the world's largest and busiest seaplane base is Anchorage's Lake Hood, where more than 600 takeoffs and landings occur daily on peak summer days. This does include tourists, happy to enjoy life in Alaska for a short and comfortable summer window. Beyond the meager network of roads in Alaska, another facet of its inaccessibility is just how far away it is from the majority of humans on the American continent. While Alaska borders on Canada, those parts of Canada aren't exactly the most populous Canadian provinces either. Then there's Alaska's distance from the American mainland. The state is only 240 miles closer to New York than it is to Tokyo, which is around 3,500 miles away, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. It's a 2-hour and 20-minute flight from Juneau to Seattle, and over 6 hours of flying to get to San Francisco. By comparison, it's a 3-hour 50-minute flight from London to Istanbul, crossing all of Europe. The scarcity of human life in Alaska today is especially remarkable when you consider its deep roots in human history. Archaeologists believe that Alaska was among the first lands in the Americas to be settled, with human presence dating back tens of thousands of years. Early migrants are thought to have crossed into Alaska from Eurasia, either via an ancient ice bridge or by primitive boats. It's also believed that humans made themselves a permanent home in Alaska back in those times, with new evidence regularly surfacing to reinforce this theory. The ancient fish traps called weirs that were found in recent years on the Alaskan coast suggest that humans did indeed establish permanent societies there as far back as 10,000 years ago. So why do so few people live in Alaska today? And also, why have some people, for tens of thousands of years now, chosen it for a home in the first place? As you'll soon find out, it may not be such a bad thing that Alaska is so remote, since the discipline, will, and survival skills required to get there are the surest test of who can survive in the state long enough to call it home. Let's start with how the first Alaskans got to what is now, a long time later, the 49th state. For a long time, archaeologists assumed that humans first crossed into North America 13,000 years ago over what they called the Bering Land Bridge, a sheet of ice that extended from modern-day eastern Russia to Alaska during the last glacial period, which lasted from around 35,000 to 70,000 years ago when the Holocene, our current interglacial period, began. Archaeological evidence suggests that early Eurasian migrants didn't just stop in Alaska. They embarked on an extraordinary journey, crossing ice bridges and rugged mountains to settle the inland wilderness of North America. From there, they ventured further, pushing southward toward the equator. The remains of ancient settlements and artifacts discovered along the American coasts offer compelling clues, painting a picture of determination and adaptability in the face of a harsh and untamed landscape. If the first Alaskans lived on the coasts, the traces they might have left went underwater long ago. Since at the end of the last glacial period, the Earth warmed significantly, a lot of ice melted, and sea levels rose by about 200 feet or 60 meters, leaving any possible evidence of human coastal settlements completely submerged. Today, the classic story of a land migration across ice and mountains is evolving. New evidence and innovative theories suggest that the earliest Eurasian migrants may have taken a different route entirely. Instead of crossing vast inland wilderness, these pioneers may have hugged the Pacific coastline, island hopping along the biodiverse kelp forests that thrive in the cool, rocky waters. Stretching from Japan to Baja California, this underwater highway of life could have provided food, shelter, and resources, offering an easier and more sustainable path into the Americas. In this way, our earliest American ancestors dispersed and settled along the American coast, going all the way down to the south coast of Chile. The earliest evidence we have of a crossing is around 13,000 years ago, with successive migrations occurring over the next 7,000 years. To understand this sudden movement of humans, it's important to keep in mind that the warming globe combined with the retreat of glaciers made for a huge explosion of life. Flora and fauna spread rapidly over newly uncovered coastlines, offering an unimaginable amount of resources to our hunter-gatherer ancestors. When considering how many of these early migrants chose to stay in Alaska, it's worth keeping your mind open to just how flourishing and plentiful Alaska might have been back then. Insect evidence from the start of our current epoch, the Holocene, indicates that Alaska was still a hell of a cold place back then, at least for us. We have no way of knowing how well humans coming out of the interglacial period dealt with the cold, but it's safe to assume they did so a little better than we do now. So, Alaska was and remains a much colder place relative to the lower latitudes most of us live in. Average temperatures in the interior range from 45 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 7 to 23 degrees Celsius in summer, and about 20 to 10 below Fahrenheit or 6 to 23 below in winter. That being said, in the summer, it isn't rare that temperatures reach into the 90s or 32 degrees plus Celsius, or that in the winter, they drop all the way down to the 60s below zero, or 51 below 0 Celsius. Besides the extraordinary temperature range this is, to most of us, these numbers are quite literally unimaginable. But if you can prepare yourself adequately for the Alaskan cold, it can offer you a few unique advantages. First off is food storage. Alaska, for any resourceful individual or tribe, is as plentiful as any other place. Today, Alaska produces 60% of the United States' commercial fisheries, including salmon, crab, cod, groundfish, shrimp, herring, sablefish, pollock, and halibut. It was no less bountiful long ago, with natives getting much of their sustenance from these same fish, while also hunting and feasting on seals, moose, elk, and other game, and using their remarkable knowledge of plants to gather up the huge variety of nutritious flora in their surroundings. Now, with temperatures regularly dropping below freezing, food can be stored for almost indefinite periods of time in Alaska. Alaskans have long leveraged their unique environmental advantage to sustain their way of life. In a land where cold temperatures dominate, preserving food stock is far less labor-intensive than in the warmer climates of lower latitudes, where heat spoils food quickly, and refrigeration costs soar. For generations, the natural refrigeration provided by Alaska's frigid environment has made the process of sustenance and food preservation not just more efficient, but a key part of thriving in such a rugged landscape. Impossible to ignore, though, is the severe cold that sets in on Alaska each winter, when sunlight ranges from scarce to non-existent. The town of Barrow, at the northern tip of Alaska, has a prolonged polar night that starts in November, which means entire months without a single ray of sunlight, the most important source of heat there is. The average year in Barrow has temperatures varying from 19 below 0 Fahrenheit or 28 below Celsius to 47 degrees Fahrenheit or 8 degrees Celsius, with the coldest temperature on record clocked at 56 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit or 48 below 0 Celsius on February 3, 1924. While this may sound terrifying, Native Alaskan tribes, as well as people currently living there, have grown used to having a sufficient stock of dry wood, ready to burn all winter. And besides the simple fact that food can be stored for so long in Alaska, there's the effect of seasonal daylight on the yield of crops and other vegetation. Because of where Alaska sits on the Earth's axis of rotation, summer days there generally peak with around 20 hours of daylight. And some northern towns like Barrow have a long, luminous summer that follows the endless night of winter. On May 10th, the sun rises and then hangs in the sky for 3 months. The effect of this on vegetation is remarkable. Common vegetables can grow to enormous proportions and often end up with a much sweeter taste than crops from lower latitudes. In recent years, a 138-pound cabbage, a 65-pound cantaloupe, and a 35-pound broccoli have ranked among some of the finest prizes. So, for those that can prepare adequately for Alaskan winters, The benefit isn't merely that agricultural produce and gathered foods can be stored longer. It's also the foods themselves, which grow to fantastical volumes and possess high nutritional values. While Alaska's extreme swings in temperature and daylight might seem daunting, the real danger lies elsewhere. Here, it's not the predictable extremes that pose the greatest threat. It's the unpredictable that truly makes Alaska a land of risk and wonder. And what that means primarily in Alaska is the day-to-day weather. Although it might be more like minute by minute. The variation in weather patterns in Alaska is common, severe, and sudden. Now, let's talk about Alaska's road networks, or the lack thereof. Even if Alaska had millions of residents demanding highways, travel by boat or plane would still reign supreme. Why? Because permafrost, which blankets a staggering 80% of Alaska, makes building infrastructure a Herculean task. Roads and buildings here don't just sit still. They shift, sink, and crack as the ground below freezes and thaws with the seasons. It's a constant battle against nature, where the land itself refuses to stay put. Add on to this the cost of shipping building materials that far north and paying the laborers a living wage, and you have the reason why there are so few roads in Alaska. Keep in mind, Alaska's small population comes with unique challenges. The demand for essential goods is relatively low compared to other states, but the cost of importing those goods, thanks to Alaska's vast distances and remote locations, is extraordinarily high. Alaska's soaring cost of living makes it one of the most expensive states to call home. While the population has fluctuated with the discovery of oil and gas, the fishing industry boom, and other natural resource-driven opportunities, the overall trend of migration into Alaska has remained largely unchanged since humans first ventured there. It's unlikely that this will shift dramatically anytime soon. As a result, don't expect Alaska's road system to ever resemble the interconnected highways of the lower 48 states. Here, the wilderness reigns, and the infrastructure reflects that reality. To truly grasp the magnitude of building roads in Alaska, let's look at the Alaska Highway, a feat of engineering built in 1942 by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This wasn't just any road project. It required an army of 11,000 soldiers and engineers, 16,000 civilians, and 7,000 pieces of equipment. The final cost was a staggering $185 million in 1942. The equivalent of over $3.5 billion today, making it the costliest infrastructure project of the Second World War. And for all that money invested, the highway didn't even cut that far into Alaska. It connected Dawson Creek, British Columbia, Canada, to Delta Junction, Alaska, at the 64th parallel. Alaska reaches all the way up into the 71st parallel, well inside the Arctic Circle. And today, at only 80 years of age, the Alaska Highway is already suffering heavily from degradation and disrepair, thanks to the harsh Alaskan climate and the scarcity of resources and funding to maintain it. There's more to Alaska's population challenges than just its harsh environment. While natural causes, like the extreme cold, isolation, and rugged terrain, play a significant role, the relationship between culture and environment has been equally important in shaping Alaska's history of population and depopulation. Over the centuries, this dynamic has influenced how communities adapt, thrive, or move on, revealing a complex relationship between the land's demands and human resilience. While one culture can deal with and incorporate a problem, another can find it a good reason to flee and never return. Anthropologists guess that around 80,000 people lived in Alaska by the time of contact with Europeans, which began in the mid-1700s. From then on, a sharp drop in population occurred, and the numbers didn't return to their pre-contact level until World War II, although the native populations never fully recovered. The reason for the sharp drop was primarily the surge of epidemics and violence which contact with Europeans brought on the native Alaskan populations. The Anthropocene, the epoch where humans became the dominant force shaping the planet's environments and climate, is often traced back to the 13th and 14th centuries with the wave of European colonizations. This global expansion didn't just alter landscapes. It brought profound and often devastating changes to local cultures, flora, and fauna across the world. While reliable census data for Alaska's population, before its purchase by the United States in 1867, is scarce, the first official American census in 1880 paints a stark picture. Just over 33,400 people called this vast land home. To put that in perspective, that meant a population density of 0.005 people per square mile, or a staggering 20 square miles per person. Compare that to today's figure of roughly 1 person per square mile, and you begin to grasp just how empty and untamed Alaska was in its early days under American control. Now, as just mentioned, Alaska was a Russian territory until 1867, when the Tsar sold the territory to the US for $7.2 million. The Russians, unable or unwilling to manage such a huge swath of remote land, wanted to be sure Alaska wouldn't fall under Japanese hands. They needed an ally to occupy the territory instead. The Americans purchased Alaska for similar reasons, as a point of strategic defense. From that point on, America has had bases and a military presence in Alaska, and today, Alaska serves as a critical point in America's nuclear missile defense system. In 1935, the American Brigadier General Billy Mitchell affirmed of Alaska under oath before Congress that it was, quote, the most strategic place on Earth. Alaska is the closest U.S. location to the center of the Northern Hemisphere, and it is far closer to many national capitals than most points in the lower 48 states. In that sense, it turns into kind of an advantage for Alaska to be relatively one of the most unpopulated. It might also explain why migration there has never been encouraged outside of economic contexts. Within 20 years of that first 1880 census, the population would double in Alaska, rising to around 63,600 people by 1900, when the gold rush of 1896 to 1897 was over, and by which time Alaska had become world famous. In 1896, a massive flood of settlers called Klondikers poured into Alaska, heading north for the Klondike region looking to make their fortunes in a time of serious economic depression. Of the 100,000 people who made the attempt simply to get to the Klondike region, only 30,000 made it. The rest turned back or died along the way. This was because most Klondikers were massively unprepared for the hardship and fight against nature that awaited them, having no idea what they were getting into. One of the Klondikers, or Stampeders as they were called, who was drawn to Alaska in that period was 21-year-old Jack London, who would later become a great American novelist. He had just dropped out of college to make his living as a writer, and arrived in Alaska with his brother-in-law and a haphazard crew on July 25, 1897. London was threadbare, gaunt, nearly starving, and hoping, like the other Klondikers, to fill his pockets in an Alaskan gold mine. And also like the other Klondikers, what London found instead turned out to be quite the surprise, and would furnish him with the materials to make one of the greatest American literary careers. By August 2nd of the same year, London arrived in Juneau. 3 days later, he was in Skagway, having paddled his way up there with 5 tons of supplies. This was where the reality of the frontier started to sink in, with London witnessing the horror of what was going on in the Alaskan hinterlands. In Skagway, London was forced to come to terms with the White Pass Trail, which from Skagway wound up into the rugged interior and the Klondike. The conditions he witnessed left him with an impression of the brutality on the Alaskan frontier like few of us will ever know, and this would form the basis of some of his most well-known literary works. Originally designed for lightly loaded horses and experienced horsemen, Dead Horse Trail was torn to bits by the unmanageable traffic, the brutal inhumanity of the stampeders, and the general inexperience and carelessness of all involved. At one point, while hauling over 100 pounds of supplies up a treacherous mountain slope, Jack London spotted a pair of shoes poking out of the snow. Thinking little of it, he tugged at them, only to discover they were still attached to a man, buried alive by an avalanche just minutes earlier. This was on the Chilkoot Trail, a path notorious for its avalanche risks, which of course many stampeders ignored completely. On April 3, 1898, the famous Palm Sunday avalanche occurred on the Chilkoot Trail, killing 65 people. Native packers had warned the stampeders of the notorious avalanche risk on the trail in the springtime, but the stampeders, with their minds set on gold, ignored these warnings as they ignored just about everything else. By the end of London's ordeal a year later, he was almost entirely crippled from the waist down due to scurvy. He ate his first vegetables in over a year in Anvik on his way out, and by the end of June, he was on the Bering Sea, shoveling coal on a steamer to pay his way out. Jack London returned to San Francisco with just $4.50 worth of gold to his name. Yet what he brought back was far more valuable, a wealth of memories, trials, and life experiences that would forge him into one of the great American writers of his time. Alaska asks a high price from those who wish to make it their home, even for a little while. Higher still for those who think they can afford to be negligent of surrounding society and natural environments. The reward can be tremendous, but the cost can easily be your life. In Alaska, survival always comes first. The pursuit of gold or fortune can wait. Preparedness is an acquired instinct that no Alaskan takes lightly, and for good reason. Let's explore just a few of the challenges that keep your average Alaskan on their toes, and why, quite simply, most people think twice about moving to this rugged, unforgiving land. The avalanche risks in Alaska are high, with 170 avalanche deaths there from 1951 to 2023. While Colorado has more avalanche deaths, with 323 avalanche deaths in the same period, it's important to remember that most avalanches are caused by humans. There are nearly 6 million people in Colorado, with millions of tourists coming every winter for the ski season. Compare that to Alaska, and you'll realize that lack of loose and melting snow is not what keeps the avalanche count in Alaska lower than Colorado's. Then, from avalanches in the winter, you get landslides and erosions in the summer. And with the melting ice each spring, flooding always follows, whether on the coast or in the rivers. Ice jams are also frequent. This is where ice blocks up a river until there is a large enough mass of water to push it all past the dam, resulting in what is, in effect, a tidal wave over the river flats. What's more, with Alaska's thousands of glaciers, glacial outbursts occur frequently, where the dam holding together a glacial lake bursts and the whole body of water suddenly pours off into the valleys below. This was the case on August 6, 2024, when the Mendenhall River near Juneau rose 16 feet, or nearly 5 meters, above its normal level near Auk Bay, all because of a glacial lake outburst flood in Suicide Basin on the Mendenhall Glacier. And with the warming climate, these problems aren't going away. Glacial lake outburst floods, uncommon on Mendenhall River in the past, have since 2011 increased dramatically in regularity, with Suicide Basin producing a glacial lake outburst flood every year since. Even if we ignore the sudden calamity posed by glacial outbursts, the high groundwater imposed by glaciation and glacial melt year-round in Alaska can severely affect coastal communities, from flooding to contamination and buildup of pollutants to quickened infrastructural decay. Another very important reason why Alaska is so uncommonly chosen as a place to live is that it sits on 3 fault systems. So saying Alaska is seismically active would be putting it lightly. Between 2013 and 2018, there were around 150,000 earthquakes, 31 of which had magnitudes of 6 or higher. Alaska is not a place you come to if you're scared the ground beneath you might give way. Alaskans have to deal with fault ruptures, seismic shaking, and landslides. It also has to deal with liquefaction. This is when seismic disruptions cause water-saturated sediment to lose its strength and act like a fluid, ruining any infrastructure that happens to stand on it and putting lives in great peril. What's especially terrifying is that landslides and earthquakes in Alaska, when large enough, can actually trigger tsunamis as well. At 5:36 p.m. local time on March 27, 1964, an earthquake of magnitude 9.2 occurred in the Prince William Sound region of Alaska. The Pacific Plate lurched northward underneath the North American Plate, slipping in some places as much as 60 feet. It lasted 4.5 minutes, and to this day, is still the second largest earthquake ever recorded. In fact, the earthquake was so large that the whole Earth rang like a bell, and modern instruments recorded vibrations that had no precedence whatsoever. The earthquake spawned thousands of aftershocks, hundreds of landslides, huge submarine landslides, and scores of other secondary effects. The most serious of these were the tsunamis triggered, which caused fatalities and other damages all the way down in Oregon and California. But this was nothing compared to what some coastal Alaskan communities like Whittier, Valdez, Seward, and Chenega faced. Within minutes of the earthquake starting, tsunamis flooded some areas as high as 170 feet above sea level. Within 4 minutes of the earthquake, a 65-foot wave barreled into Chenega, killing a third of its population. All in all, the earthquake resulted in 129 fatalities sustained and billions of dollars in property losses. Alaska's dangers are countless: extreme weather, wildfires, volcanic eruptions, and limited search and rescue capabilities. Add to that the constant threat of losing critical infrastructure, power, communications, water systems, and clinics, or facing facility failures like collapsing bridges, washed-out roads, and hazardous spills. Every Alaskan knows these risks intimately. Why? Because here, the number one rescue resource is yourself. Unlike the lower 48, there's no guarantee of outside help. It's you versus the wild. And fundamentally, this is why there are so few people living in Alaska. As we've seen, Alaska is a land of paradoxes. At once, one of the most inhospitable places in the world, and one of the most bountiful. It's a place where some find their true strength, resilience, and a self-reliant way of life, and where others find a cold, hard end. So, though Alaska will likely never have swaths of humans flocking to it again, as they have repeatedly done so over the ages, it will certainly hold a certain awe over us. It will continue to draw those of us who are tempted and taunted by the wildlife out into its enormous wilderness to see if we have what it takes. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack. Did you know that a storm can form a new border? Or if you exit a library the wrong way, it can land you in trouble with Border Patrol, and that you can sleep in 2 countries at once. Today, we'll bring you 50 insane border facts that seem fake, but are shockingly real. Fact 50. France's longest border is with Brazil. No, you're not misremembering where France is. The European nation's longest land border is with Brazil. It's thanks to French Guiana, a French territory tucked away in northeastern South America. The border clocks in at 450 miles or 730 kilometers long. Meanwhile, France's border with Italy is 320 miles or 515 kilometers long, and the country's border with Germany is only 280 miles or 450 kilometers long. Fact 49. You can play soccer on the equator. What if instead of defending your own goal on the soccer pitch, you were defending your own hemisphere? That's actually how soccer, or rather football teams play down at the Estádio Milton Correa in Macapá, Brazil. Since the stadium was built on the equator, the architects decided they'd really take advantage of the zero-latitude line and use it as the halfway line of the football pitch. Locals nicknamed the stadium Zero, or the Big Zero, referring to its geographical position. Fact number 48. There's a fence longer than the Great Wall of China. Australia is known for many weird and deadly things. And yes, we're talking about the wildlife. One of those creatures is the dingo. These wild dogs pose a serious threat to something Australian farmers value above all else: sheep. So to keep the dingoes out, a fence was built along the southeastern part of the country, a really long fence. At just under 3,500 miles or 5,600 kilometers long, Australia's dingo fence is longer than the Great Wall of China and longer than the border between Russia and China. It started to take shape in the 1880s, at first to keep out rabbits, another big pest for farmers, and took its current shape in the 1950s. Today, the fence has successfully kept dingoes mostly to one side of it, creating a pretty unique ecological experiment along the way. The side with dingoes has more biodiversity, more small native mammals, and stays greener for longer after rains. On the other hand, the non-dingo side has more kangaroos. Fact 47. Konstanz avoided bombs due to its border. The city of Konstanz is divided between Germany and Switzerland, something that proved useful for residents during World War II. Switzerland was neutral during the war, while Germany, as we all know, was one of the Axis powers. German towns enacted blackouts during Allied bombing raids, with residents even painting windows black and refusing to light candles to avoid bombs. But towns in neutral Switzerland would leave their lights on at night during raids. The German side of Konstanz then realized they could take advantage of this by also leaving their lights on, making the Allies mistake them for a neutral Swiss city. Fact number 46. Portugal and Spain like having weird border crossings, as you'll see later. You can cross between Spain and Portugal on the world's shortest international bridge. Head to Esperança, Portugal, and you can cross a 10.4-foot or 3.2-meter long bridge into the Spanish region of La Codocera, meant for foot traffic instead of cars. So you take a nice long walk into a neighboring country, and while you're at it, be prepared to jump 1 hour ahead in just a few steps, thanks to Spain's different time zone. Fact number 45. The borders of Spain and France change every 6 months. Every 6 months, Spain transfers an island to France that promptly returns it 6 months later. The piece of land called Pheasant Island is located on the Bidasoa River that divides the two countries. This strange biannual transfer of a 2-acre uninhabited island started as a symbol of peace between the two powers, agreed upon in the Treaty of Pyrenees at the end of the 30 Years' War, all the way back in 1659. Today, no visitors are allowed on the island, except for when it changes hands. Government officials from both countries meet there to arrange the transfer, no doubt confusing the kayakers around them. Fact 44. There are only 3 enclave countries in the world. An enclave is a country that's completely surrounded by another country, and only 3 of them currently exist. San Marino and Vatican City have it relatively easy, as they're fully located within Italy and considered de facto members of the Schengen zone, so there are no formal border checks to enter or exit the countries. Things are a little different for the third country, Lesotho, which is fully within South Africa. Residents need to pass South African border control to get to the sea. The Lesotho border is also unique in that it's very visible from above, as Lesotho is mostly a mountainous plateau extending upwards from the land around it. Fact number 43. The town of Barla has an identity crisis. In northwestern Europe, you'll find the Dutch town of Barla, or the Belgian town of Barla. Really, it depends on where exactly in Barla you're standing. The Flemish province of Barla-Hertog is technically a Belgian province, but it's scattered in multiple pieces throughout the Netherlands. The border between the two countries runs through cafes, schools, even private homes in a really haphazard way. But if you get confused while you're in town, don't worry. There are helpful white markings on the ground to tell you when you're in the Netherlands, NL, or Belgium, B. Why did the town end up this way? Because in the Middle Ages, the lords of Breda and dukes of Brabant kept changing their minds on how to divide up the land. So through swaps, sales, and treaties, they ended up with the patchwork town of Barla today. Fact number 42. A small piece of Russia is nowhere near it. Tiny Kaliningrad Oblast is separated from the rest of Russia's enormous landmass by Lithuania, Latvia, and Belarus. How did this Russian-populated sliver of land end up so far from the rest of Russia? Kaliningrad was originally part of East Prussia, and then Germany. After the Soviet Union and the Allies defeated Germany in World War II, Germans fled from the area and Russians populated it. Later, when the Soviet Union was dissolved and countries in the area were claiming their independence, Russia offered Kaliningrad to Germany. However, the Germans turned it down, as they were already trying to figure out how to unify East and West Germans and didn't want to add Russians to the mix as well, thus leaving Kaliningrad as a little piece of Russia away from Russia. Fact number 41. Exiting from the wrong side at Haskell Free Library and Opera is an illegal border crossing. The Haskell Free Library and Opera is located at 93 Caswell Avenue, Derby Line, Vermont, USA, or, depending on how you enter, at 1 Church Street, Stansted, Quebec, Canada. The library is built right on the US-Canada border and can be visited from either side. However, be careful how you exit. You can't just walk into Canada from the US or vice versa. The door is on the American side. Canadians must stick to the sidewalk leading to the entrance, but can't walk into the town beyond it without a passport check. Bibliophiles will need to have ID on them at all times, because they may be searched by Border Patrol agents. In the meantime, they relax at the building's craft table, where people can put their feet up in Canada while the rest of them is knitting in the United States. Fact number 40. Spain has heavily guarded borders in North Africa. On the north coast of Morocco, you'll find 2 towns surrounded by barbed wire, Melilla and Ceuta. They're heavily guarded because they're actually part of Spain, though Morocco also lays claim to both and would like to annex them. Spain annexed Ceuta from Portugal in 1668, and Melilla changed hands from a Berber city to Spanish control in 1497. Since these are 2 of the only European Union land borders in Africa, many immigrants from North African countries try to cross into the Spanish cities and claim asylum there. The 20-foot, 6-meter fence at Ceuta has occasionally been stormed, resulting in injuries to those who try to cross it. Fact number 39. The Gambia has some of the strangest borders in Africa. If you look closely at Senegal, you might notice something inside it. Another country. This is the Gambia, the smallest non-island nation in Africa, and its borders run along a river. Why? Well, the answer, as is usually the case when it comes to weirdly drawn borders, is colonialism. The French and the British had outposts in the area that they used for trading, but then France decided it was going to start claiming more inland regions. So the French took full control of the Senegal River, which the British didn't like as they wanted a river of their own so they could also plunder the continent. So they negotiated with France to see who would control what, and decided on keeping a strip of land 6 miles in each direction from the Gambia River. Local leaders tried to protest, announcing that they would actually like to keep their land as well, to which the British responded by parading some warships down the river. Today, the Gambia ranges from 15 to 30 miles wide on either side of the river and 300 miles inland. Fact number 38. Croatia only allows Bosnia and Herzegovina 12 miles of coastline. Though at first glance, it looks like Croatia is firmly against allowing Bosnians to go to the beach, if you take a closer look, you'll notice a small strip of Bosnian land on the coast. This is called the Neum Corridor. It all started after the 1699 Treaty of Karlovac, when Venice gained territory near Dubrovnik. Venice was on a land-grabbing spree, and Dubrovnik wasn't exactly thrilled to have them as neighbors. So, in a clever diplomatic move, Dubrovnik handed over a strip of land to the Ottoman Empire. The goal was to create a buffer zone, hoping the presence of the Ottomans would discourage Venice from getting any closer. At the time, Bosnia and Herzegovina were part of the Ottoman Empire prior to independence, so it retained this land as the Neum Corridor. Today, it's the second shortest coastline in the world, after Monaco. Fact number 37. Climate change is shifting the Italy-Switzerland border. The Italy-Switzerland border runs through the Swiss and Italian Alps, including the mighty Matterhorn. Big portions of the border are determined by the local watershed or the ridgelines formed by glaciers. But Europe's glaciers are retreating, and fast, which means Switzerland and Italy just had to meet in September of 2024 in order to redraw their border beneath the Matterhorn as the glacier covering it slowly disappears. Fact number 36. The world's tallest border runs through Mount Everest. Forget border walls and fences. The best way to make sure no one crosses your border is to put the Himalayan mountain range on it. That's the case for the border between Nepal and China, officially the highest in the world. It reaches its highest altitude at the peak of Mount Everest, at over 29,000 feet above sea level. However, no border is without its issues. There is a furrow in the Himalayas where Chinese patrols and border stations keep strict watch, mostly to prevent Chinese Tibetans from fleeing to Nepal. However, Nepalis have plenty of complaints about their Chinese neighbors as well, namely that they're encroaching on their space. Tibetan Nepalis also say that they're pressured not to display images of the Dalai Lama near the border, while the Chinese have carved a 600-foot-long political slogan into their hillside facing Nepal. It says, "Long live the Chinese Communist Party." So things are tense along that line. Fact number 35. We've spoken about the highest border in the world, but what about the highest international crossing? At least the highest official one. That would be Khunjerab Pass, a dizzying gateway that connects Pakistan and China at a staggering elevation of nearly 15,400 feet, or just shy of 4,700 meters high. Fact number 34. Limited-purpose annexations have made U.S. city maps like Houston's unreadable. It's not only countries that have weird borders. Cities, particularly U.S. cities, have some of the strangest borders in the world. Take this map of Houston, for example. Why is it so weird? Great question. Part of the reason is because cities like Houston love annexing other neighborhoods, usually by request of those in the area, even if they're not directly connected to the city. The other reason is something called limited-purpose annexations. That's when a city annexes very limited territory via agreement with a utility district, leading to those little thin strips of land you see on the Houston map. That way, Houston can collect sales tax from commercial districts but no property tax, while having to offer few services in return. Since 2000, Houston has completed 196 limited-purpose annexations. Fact 33. You can hike across the India-Nepal border. There's a 7-day trek called the Sandakphu Circuit Trek that takes people through the eastern Himalayas. During the trip, hikers can see some of the highest peaks in the world, including Mount Everest, and also crisscross the India-Nepal border several times. You'll reach altitudes over 11,900 feet, or over 3,600 meters, and the challenging trail, in addition to the even rougher terrain off-trail, generally discourages illegal permanent crossings. As Nepal and India have pretty friendly relations anyway, they keep the trail freely accessible. Fact number 32. You can have lunch on 3 borders. People from Slovakia, Austria, and Hungary can come together to grab a quick bite on a picnic table that sits right at the intersection of their borders. Fittingly, it's a 3-sided table and has 1 side per country. However, it's apparently really hard to find on Google Maps, and visitors trying to locate it usually give up after accidentally crossing the border 5 or 6 times. As you can tell from people accidentally changing countries near this border, thanks to the Schengen zone, it's not really a border that's big on security. Fact 31. Ireland's border is almost non-existent. For all the conflict Ireland experienced during the 20th century, you might think that the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, which belongs to the UK, would be heavily guarded, or at least have checkpoints. But driving from Ireland to Northern Ireland, you might miss the fact that you crossed a border altogether. The only sign you'll get that you're in a different country is the literal road signs indicating speed changing from kilometers to miles, and traditional UK forms of signage on streets and in villages. Fact number 30. There's a border with over 1 million landmines. The DMZ, the Korean Demilitarized Zone that separates North and South Korea, is well known as the most militarized border in the world, despite its name suggesting the opposite. Though it looks and sounds like a terrifying place, about 1.2 million tourists, mostly from the South Korean side, visit every year. However, outside of the part that attracts visitors, the DMZ is also home to over 1 million buried landmines, placed by North and South Korea, the US, and China during the Korean War. Signs warning people of landmines appear throughout the forest. In fact, the US continued placing mines in the 1960s around the civilian control line, and then failed to disclose exactly where they had put them before, withdrawing and leaving it up to South Korea to figure it out. While the South Korean government is currently working to clear them up, it's a difficult process, and so far, they've cleared an average of 500 landmines per year, according to 2019 figures. But that's hardly the only weird fact about the DMZ. Fact number 29, the DMZ splits a table in half. In what we can only assume is a non-landmine-infested portion of the DMZ, there's a table that's split in half between North and South Korea. It allows officials from both nations to sit down and negotiate without technically stepping into the other country. Because nothing says trust and goodwill like needing a borderline running through your meeting table. Fact number 28. The border of Market Island was changed due to a mistake. Finland and Sweden have shared Market Island for centuries. The border used to be a straight line through the tiny 8.2-acre island in the Baltic Sea. But in 1885, while Finland was still controlled by Russia, Russia decided that a lighthouse had to be built on the island to help guide boats around its rocky shores. After the lighthouse was built, everyone realized that they'd built it on the island's Swedish half by accident. So, in 1985, Sweden and Finland decided to make things right. Being super Nordic about it, they made the border zigzag through Market Island so everything would still be divided up equally, maintaining fishing rights for both countries. Fact number 27. The Hallakargrabari, if I'm saying that correctly, was the only third-order enclave in the world. Though this border has now been corrected, it was so weird for so long that we had to point it out. India and Bangladesh have had many exclaves inside the other country. 106 Indian exclaves existed in Bangladesh, while 92 Bangladeshi exclaves existed inside India at one time. But the Hallakargrabari was special. It was an Indian exclave within a Bangladeshi enclave, the village of Upanchauki Bajni 110, within the Indian enclave of Balaparakargrabari, within Debiganya in Bangladesh. That made it the world's only third-order enclave, and at 1.7 acres, one of the smallest uninhabited farmland owned by a Bangladeshi farmer. The enclaves made life for Indian and Bangladeshi residents in the region incredibly frustrating. To fix this, in September of 2011, both countries agreed to let residents choose their nationality, finally giving them a say in their identity. On May 6, 2015, India officially ceded this enclave to Bangladesh. Fact number 26. Nawa is in the UAE, Oman, the UAE, in that order. India and Bangladesh are far from the only countries to face enclave issues. Just head to Nawa in the United Arab Emirates, part of the Sharjah Emirate but located within Omani territory named Mada, which is actually an exclave of Oman, located within the United Arab Emirates. This order of things came about in the 1930s to 1940s, when community leaders were asked which sheikhdom they wanted to pledge allegiance to. Nawa chose Sharjah, while Mada chose Oman, and everyone else just let them, creating the weird border situation that exists there today. Fact number 25. There is an official marking of the Asia-Europe border. Geographers dispute the exact dividing line between Europe and Asia, but at least one city has decided it knows exactly where the border is and has erected a monument to it. Near Yekaterinburg, Russia, you'll find a massive obelisk with a line down the middle dividing the monument into the European side and the Asian side. The people who set it up went one step further in representing the continents, bringing a rock from the extreme west of Europe to the base of the European side of the monument, and a rock from the extreme east of Asia to the base of the Asian side. Fact number 24. Canada and Denmark share a border. Canada and Denmark seem to reside on different continents, but not fully thanks to the somewhat autonomous island of Greenland, that's nevertheless still part of Denmark. So, Canada and Greenland share a land border with each other on Hans Island, a tiny island in Nares Strait up in the high Arctic. Both countries claimed the island for decades in order to secure fishing and maritime rights. The dispute was known as the Whiskey War, which some have described as one of the most passive-aggressive boundary disputes in history and the friendliest war. Yet, it's a recent war, as the battle over Hans Island was only resolved on June 14, 2022. When the two countries agreed to split the island, awarding 40% to Canada and 60% to Greenland. Fact number 23. Kiribati is the only country in the world straddling all four hemispheres. The Pacific island nation of Kiribati is made up of 33 islands. What it lacks in size, at 313 square miles, and population, over 136,000, it makes up for in sheer length. The islands are spread out so far that they cross not only the equator, but also the international dateline and the 180th meridian. That makes Kiribati the only country in the world to be spread between the northern, southern, western, and eastern hemispheres. Fact 22. Unclaimed land on the Serbo-Croatian border became a libertarian paradise. The tiny nation of Liberland is made up of 2.5 square miles or 6.5 square kilometers of marshland. Also, it's not really recognized as a nation by anyone except Vit Jedlička, the first president, and 500,000 potential citizens who signed up for it online. Jedlička's dream was to create a libertarian paradise, one with no taxes, no gun control, and powered by blockchain and Bitcoin. But despite his enthusiasm for Liberland, no one actually lives there. The land originally belonged to Serbia, but when borders were redrawn after the Yugoslav Civil War, it ended up in Croatia. However, Croatia also got less land in the deal overall and refused to accept these new borders. So Liberland just kinda sat there, unclaimed and unwanted. However, when Jedlička set up his libertarian state, Croatia realized it also didn't want a bunch of foreigners coming in and setting up with guns right next to their country. So they banned everyone from entering Liberland, including Jedlička himself. Fact number 21. The Fergana Valley borders are a Rorschach test. Looking at the place where Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan meet in the Fergana Valley can be disorienting. Each country has so many random enclaves in the other that it's hard to tell where one border ends and the other begins. When Soviets originally drew borders in this part of the world in the 1920s, they were guided less by local settlements and migration patterns and more by, this is where we feel like drawing lines. During the time the countries were still part of the Soviet Union, this wasn't a big issue, but when they became independent republics, locals suddenly had tons of problems with road, water, and energy access. The Soch enclave is a perfect example of the lack of logic in drawing these borders. It's part of Uzbekistan, but surrounded by Kyrgyzstan, and has a population that is 99% Tajik. Fact number 20. A town in Italy has its train station in Slovenia. When residents of Gorica, Italy want to catch a train out of town, they have to leave the country first. That's because the town's train station is located right across the border in Slovenia. Today, both countries are part of the Schengen area, making border crossings smooth and uneventful. But back in Soviet times, when Slovenia was still part of Yugoslavia, things looked very different. The square in front of the station's passenger buildings was divided by the Wall of Gorica, creating a real problem for transportation access. Transalpina Square remained divided between Italy and Slovenia until 2004, when Slovenia joined the EU and the wall was demolished. Fact number 19. A bike trail splits up Germany. The Fennbahn bike trail weaves its way from Aachen in Germany, through Belgium, and all the way to Luxembourg. It's built on now unused railway tracks that were once very important for countries in the area. Germany built the tracks and originally managed the trains that ran on them, but after World War I, they ceded land to Belgium. Belgium argued that they should control the land the train tracks were on as well to ensure economic connections between their new holdings and the rest of the country. Germany argued back, but since they had started a world war, no one really cared much what they thought at the time. The Treaty of Versailles agreed with Belgium and gave them control of the land the tracks were on. This created 7 German exclaves on the other side of them, 5 of which still exist today. They're not particularly huge German properties. One, called Rückschlag, is so small that it only has a house with a garden. Whenever that resident wants to see another German, he has to cross Belgium. Fact 18. Angola has an exclave because of oil. North of Angola is Cabinda Province, a part of the country sandwiched between the Republic of Congo and Democratic Republic of Congo. While Angola and Cabinda were both Portuguese protectorates, they were separate. After Angolan independence in 1975, however, Angola kept Cabinda, even though it was never explicitly handed the territory. Since then, there has been a lot of political strife in Cabinda, mostly due to independence movements and then repression by the government, because Cabinda is the most oil-rich province of an oil-rich country. The oil extracted from Cabinda amounts to half of Angola's oil profits, and locals feel that the government of Angola gets much more from them than it gives. This has led to a combination of separatist movements, attacks, and nonviolent protests. Fact 17. You can get an Arctic Circle border passport stamp. Though the Arctic Circle is visible on globes and maps, it's not a recognized border for most. However, if you want proof that you crossed into this northern, freezing part of the world, you can get a passport stamp in Rovaniemi, Finland, showing that you visited the Arctic Circle. Rovaniemi is known for incredible Northern Lights shows, wintertime activities, and being the home of Santa. So while getting your stamp, you can also submit your gift request list, but only if you've been nice this year. Fact number 16. Belize's border is actually disputed. Most maps of Central America will show the border between Guatemala and Belize as a broken line, indicating a dispute. So what's the problem between Guatemala and Belize? Well, it started with the British. The two countries signed the Wai'anae Treaty in 1859. Article 1 established the modern-day border, separating Belize from Guatemala. However, Guatemala claims that Article 7 of the treaty stated that Britain would provide economic assistance to Guatemala, which it failed to do, meaning the rest of the treaty is void as well. That being said, even though the border technically remains disputed, it's a fight that's cooled down a lot, especially since 1991, when Guatemala officially recognized Belize's independence. And with such beautiful beaches, who could stay mad at them for long? Fact 15. The US-Canada border is marked by a tree slash. The US-Canada border is the longest border in the world, clocking in at just over 5,500 miles or almost 8,900 kilometers. But how is it actually marked? Turns out by a 20-foot or 6-meter wide slash through the forests that span between the two countries. The Convention of 1818 determined that the western portion of the border between the US and Canada was the 49th parallel. The International Boundary Commission, the IBC, started the painstaking process of cutting down the trees at the border and setting up over 8,000 border markers, many still standing today, though not all are exactly on the border, since no one had a GPS system to check during construction, so there's a fair amount of zigzagging. Every 6 years, the IBC sends out more people to maintain the border, even though few people besides the workers will ever see it. They still want anyone who comes across it to know where they are. Fact number 14. There are 2 Kansas cities because of marketing. The first settlements in present-day Kansas City started developing on the banks of the Kansas River on the Missouri side. They grew quite big, thanks partly to the Great Riverside location, and really took off after Missouri incorporated them as the city of Kansas in 1853, eventually renaming it Kansas City in 1889. At the same time, smaller towns were forming across the river in Kansas. Hoping to piggyback off the buzz Kansas City had generated, the towns banded together and also named themselves Kansas City. Rumors say the towns in Kansas also thought they had more claim to the name because they were, well, in Kansas. Today, even though both cities are in the same metropolitan area, they are still very much 2 different Kansas cities. Fact 13. The US border wall sometimes blocks entry from US citizens. The geography of a nation's border can make building walls difficult, and the US found this out when constructing sections of the border wall with Mexico. In some areas, they built the wall far inland, and in the process, left chunks of US territory and residents stranded on the other side. This resulted in farms, homes, La Lomita Church, and the Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge being all caught between the wall and the border. There was even a proposal at one point that would have split the University of Brownsville right down the middle. One analysis showed that completing a full border wall in the Rio Grande Valley would leave 100 square miles of US territory on the wrong side. This creates a problem because in cities like Brownsville, that means the wall has left several gates open to allow people to access US properties and territories on the other side of it, completely defeating the purpose of the wall in the first place. Fact number 12. Indian and Pakistani soldiers have died defending a glacial border. India and Pakistan, two nations that will find any reason to fight, have an ongoing dispute about the Sachin Glacier that sits on their border. When the two nations first gained independence, they decided their border would run somewhere through the glacier. Since the glacier was an uninhabited mass of freezing ice reaching 20,000 feet or 6,000 meters in altitude, neither nation thought it was really important to determine where exactly the border lay. But then, Pakistan started granting some climbing permits for Sachin. India, incensed at Pakistan allowing people to climb this windswept mass of ice, responded by claiming the whole glacier and sending 3,000 troops to the top to guard it and make sure no Pakistani was climbing it. In retaliation, Pakistan sent its own troops up the glacier. Since 1984, almost 2,700 Indian and Pakistani soldiers have died on the Sachin Glacier. Not from warfare, but mostly from exposure, altitude, and avalanches. All to continue one of the most pointless border disputes of all time. Fact number 11. Strange borders in Afghanistan have allowed one region to live in relative peace. On the northeast side of Afghanistan is a small, finger-like piece of land called the Vakhan Corridor, stretching all the way to Xinjiang, China, bordered by Tajikistan and Pakistan on either side. Brits originally created it as a buffer zone between the British and Russian empires. The Vakhan Corridor is a jaw-droppingly beautiful valley, nestled between two mountain ranges, fairly isolated from not only the rest of Afghanistan, but also neighboring countries, thanks to its geography. Strangely, that has also made it one of the safest areas in Afghanistan, even during the war and numerous Taliban takeovers. Speaking of this part of the world, fact number 10. Crossing from Afghanistan to China puts you almost 4 hours in the future. Afghanistan and China share a small, 57-mile-long border at the end of the Vakhan Corridor. And if you cross it, you'll be jumping 3.5 hours into the future. That makes this particular border the biggest time jump in the world, since Afghanistan is at GMT plus 430 and China is at GMT plus 8. The reason for this has mostly to do with China. The massive country surprisingly only has one time zone oriented to the east, specifically to the capital of Beijing, which is over 2,200 miles away from the border with Afghanistan. That's similar to the distance between Las Vegas and New York City, which have a 3-hour time difference. The result is a massive time jump that happens on the Afghanistan border. Fact number 9. The UK still has borders in Cyprus. The small country of Cyprus is incredibly divided. Not only is it split between the Republic of Cyprus to the south and the occupied Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus to the north, the latter recognized only by Turkey, it also has 2 small plots of land on the southern coast that belong to the UK. Cyprus was once part of the British Empire, and you can still see traces of that legacy today, like driving on the left side of the road. But the British didn't just leave behind road habits, they never fully left at all. They maintain 2 military bases in Akrotiri and Dhekelia, both of which are still held as British overseas territories. Fact number 8. France and the Netherlands have a border in the Caribbean. There's a tropical island in the Caribbean known as Saint Martin or Sint Maarten, depending on which side you're on and who you ask. You see, the northern side of the island belongs to France, while the southern side belongs to the Netherlands. The division goes way back to the Treaty of Concordia that the two nations signed on March 23, 1648, to resolve ongoing fights about resources and land in the Caribbean colonies. Today, Saint Martin is the smallest inhabited island to be divided between 2 countries, but the line between the 2 sides is pretty much invisible, with people moving freely between the 2. Fact number 7. You can zipline into Portugal. What's the coolest way of crossing a border? On a horse, on a motorcycle, or how about on a zipline? Tourists can zipline from Spain into the Portuguese town of Alcotim, and then take the ferry back across the river to Spain, usually included in the cost of the zipline experience, or stay in Portugal if they choose. The zipline is almost 2,400 feet or 730 meters long, and those who do it will reach speeds of 45 to 50 miles an hour while flying above the water. Best of all, since Portugal and Spain are in different time zones, you'll land in Portugal a full hour before you left, giving you extra time to explore the town. Fact number 6. Jungholz is cut off from Austria by a mountain. In Western Austria, there's a village called Jungholz that is connected to the rest of the country at one tiny single point on the map, a quadripoint, a mountain peak where 4 municipalities, 2 German, 2 Austrian, meet. Sorgschroffen Mountain reaches up to nearly 5,400 feet, and the only way to connect to Austria from Jungholz is to scale it and come down on the other side. Which is why most people in Jungholz go through Germany instead, where actual roads exist. The weird geography separating Jungholz led to the town being included in the German customs area and using German currency before the introduction of the euro, though it is legally still a part of Austria. Fact number 5. Namibia's Panhandle. Namibia has a fairly normal shape until you get to the northeastern corner and see a long, thin panhandle going inwards over Botswana. It's a leftover from colonial times, when Germans needed an easy way to travel from their Namibian colony to German East Africa, present-day Burundi, Rwanda, and Tanzania. They were sick of traveling all the way around South Africa to get there, so they made a deal with the British for the land around the Zambezi River instead, in exchange for Zanzibar. But they did not do their homework before signing on the dotted line, and the British did not seek to inform them of something really important. Because on the Zambezi River lies a giant roadblock on the way to East Africa, Victoria Falls. A waterfall twice the size of Niagara Falls makes shipping across the river pretty much impossible, meaning the Germans gave up Zanzibar and got nothing they wanted for it. And so today, Namibia has a weird little land finger going inland. Fact number 4. Bertauwil is the real no man's land. Countries usually argue about land because they both want to claim it. Bertauwil bears the unique distinction of being fought over because no one wants it. Located between Egypt and Sudan, Bertauwil is basically the problem child in a custody battle between 2 absent parents. So why doesn't either country want to claim it? Sure, the 795 square miles of Bertauwil are barren, but it's not exactly like the rest of Sudan and Egypt are teeming with lush forests. Well, as with many international disputes, this one traces back to British colonialism. In 1899, when Egypt was a British protectorate, the British drew a line placing Bertauwil in Sudan. But in 1902, they drew another line, putting it in Egypt instead. To resolve their mistake, by making it worse, they then said that Egypt and Sudan had to divide up the territories of Bertauwil and Halayib between them, but each country could only claim one. Since Halayib is on the Red Sea, both countries would prefer it. So Bertauwil lies unwanted, forgotten as one of the last unclaimed places on Earth. Well, except for Jeremiah Heaton of Virginia, who planted a flag there and claimed it in 2014 to name himself King of North Sudan because his daughter wanted to be a princess. Fact number 3. At Hotel Arbe, you can sleep in France and Switzerland at the same time. In 1862 and 1863, Napoleon III decided he would redraw the border between France and Switzerland, with part of it going through a plot of land belonging to a businessman named Ponthus. But Ponthus would have none of it, and decided that before the border could become official, he would build a house right on it. He put a bar on the French side and a store on the Swiss side, coincidentally reflecting age-old stereotypes about wine-loving French and money-having Swiss. When his sons inherited the property, they made it into the Hotel Arbe Franco-Suisse in 1921. The border now runs through the hotel's dining room, and you can even lie down in some rooms with your head in France and your feet in Switzerland. Fact number 2. There's a border crossing for cattle. With all the focus on checking how and where humans can cross borders, it's easy to forget that humans aren't the only ones that need to travel between countries. Cows do as well. The US imports a lot of its cows from Mexico, particularly from the state of Chihuahua on the US-Mexico border. So, the US set up specific border crossings for cattle at various points, including at Santa Teresa and Columbus, New Mexico, and Presidio, Texas. Annually, 1.2 million cattle realize their dreams of visiting the US this way. And then they all went to a big farm upstate. And finally, fact number 1. The smallest border in the world was formed by a thunderstorm. Spain and Morocco claim the shortest border in the world. It's just 279 feet or 85 meters long, located on a rocky island in the Mediterranean called Peñón de Vélez de la Gomera. Well, at least it used to be an island, up until a thunderstorm in 1934 deposited sand everywhere and created a small strip of land. Now, the island is connected to Morocco via a sandy isthmus that leads to the town of Bades. Peñón de Vélez de la Gomera is only inhabited by Spanish troops that are stationed for surveillance. They live without electricity or running water and are replaced every month with new troops, because there's only so long you can live on a rock like that without any Wi-Fi. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack. In North Korea, young citizens were recently executed by firing squad for nothing more than enjoying South Korean soap operas and K-pop, things the authorities said were corrupting the minds of the youth. Over in Myanmar, citizens accused of dissent have been tortured with snakes and insects, while villages were burned to the ground by order of the military government. In Eritrea, East Africa, authorities regularly engage in torture and enforced disappearance as citizens are abducted from their villages and sold into modern-day slavery. These are the ends of the earth where freedom and rights are concerned. But in terms of totalitarian rule, brutality, and sheer madness, there's a place so strange and forbidding that it rarely gets mentioned. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and take a look inside the most insane dictatorship on earth. Turkmenistan. A country that has been dubbed the North Korea of Central Asia, borders Uzbekistan to the north and Iran to the south. Covering around 190,000 square miles, a landmass similar to France or Spain, it sits between China, Russia, and Europe. Once overlooked on the global stage, its vast natural gas reserves have recently catapulted it into the center of geopolitical maneuvering. According to Freedom House and its latest Freedom Index, Turkmenistan ranks even lower than many of the world's most notorious dictatorships. That includes North Korea, a country where the vast majority of citizens are not aware of what the world looks like outside their own borders. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has labeled foreign artistic influence a vicious cancer, claiming it threatens the nation's culture. As a result, anyone caught enjoying bands like Blackpink or BTS risks being executed in front of a stadium of spectators, a brutal warning meant to eliminate outside influence entirely. Turkmenistan, tied with South Sudan as the least free nation on the planet, also has a long history of banning music, especially anything that could interfere with the thought processes of the Turkmen public. In 2024, the country banned foreign songs at weddings, telling citizens to play music in the Turkmen language, preferably songs sung by their musically talented former leader, a highly corrupt multi-billionaire we'll discuss throughout this video. Citizens were asked to praise him in their speeches, with reports saying non-compliance would not be tolerated. And as everyone understands, in Turkmenistan, walls have ears. You do what you're told. An anonymous source who'd recently watched some friends getting married told Outside Media everyone was terribly unhappy about how extensively the government is interfering in our private lives. A courageous statement considering the penalties for criticism of the powers that be. Still, despite a superlatively low score on the Freedom Index, Turkmen are said to be freer now than in the recent past. Things were a lot different during the era of Saparmurat Niyazov, Turkmenistan's first dictator-in-chief. Niyazov was a master of the ignoble lie, building a mythic persona through state-crafted propaganda we recognize as a cult of personality. To Westerners, this kind of rulership might seem like an absurdist political dark comedy, but for Turkmen, it was a harsh and brutal reality. Like Kim Jong-un in North Korea, Nyazov believed that music that didn't praise him or the great country he'd made in his image could corrupt the minds of the youth. In 2005, he decided the best way to deal with a burgeoning footloose population was to ban recorded music. Transgressors, he said, would be dealt with by the authorities. And indeed, plenty of Turkmen musicians have been arrested over the years for the crime of making pop music. After one such instance, reports from outside the country stated that police forcibly cut their hair and taunted them. Nyazov also banned recorded music on TV. Theme tunes or background music were forbidden. Cars were problematic because who doesn't like to listen to music on the radio? His solution was to decree that all radios be purged from vehicles. This was when he also banned beards for young men, because beards were apparently for terrorists. He banned long hair for males too, a style he believed was better suited to women. Opera and ballet were also banned. In his own words, he was, quote, protecting the true culture of Turkmenistan. Gold teeth were also out, because according to Nyazov, there was no need for them. He told the public they wouldn't need prosthetics if they just chewed on bones, as canines do, which he said would strengthen their teeth, just as it does for dogs. While there is a comedic element to these dog and teeth stories, the decrees were deadly serious. Nyazov set up a new Ministry of Justice to be a watchdog on amoral behavior, promising severe punishments to anyone who didn't adhere. In Turkmenistan, this can mean torture, arbitrary detention, or forced disappearance. We'll talk more about punishments later, but for now, let's stick with Nyazov's rampage on reason. He named a moon crater after himself. He put his name on a mountain peak. He said that a planet in the Taurus constellation should bear his name. The country's juiciest melons and a breed of horse were named after him. He also changed the names of days and months in reference to him, his family, or the greatness of the country he claimed to have designed and constructed from a prophetic vision. And who could argue? He had made himself president for life, telling his people he had ushered in a golden age in a country that, by some metrics, was closer to the Middle Ages. Let's go back in history now and see how all this madness started. For centuries, the area we now call Turkmenistan was home to nomadic tribes. Agriculture was difficult in a nation that was one very large expanse of stiflingly hot and very dry desert. Still, given its location on the Silk Road connecting China to present-day Iraq, it was an important place for budding conquerors. The ancient city of Marv was akin to an oasis, which over hundreds of years was controlled by Alexander the Great, the Parthian Empire, and the Sasanian Empire. The conquerors brought with them Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Judaism, among other religions. The Arab invasions of the 7th and 8th centuries brought Islam to Marv, the religion of 95% of Turkmen in the modern day. Genghis Khan arrived in the region in the 1200s, who in his conquest of Asia stopped in Marv, burned it to the ground, and murdered about 1 million people. It was after this devastation that the area we know today as Turkmenistan was ruled by various tribal peoples. Okay, admittedly, that's a lot of history in a very small nutshell, because the part we want to concentrate on is the arrival of the Russian Empire in the 1800s. The Tsarist Empire had its eyes on the entire Central Asian region, expressing a desire to subdue what it considered an uncivilized group of people. These groups, what we call the Khanates, were semi-nomadic people who, long after Britain abolished slavery in its vast empire, were some of the busiest slave traders in the entire world, if not the busiest in the 19th century. Millions of slaves were traded in this region throughout history, while hundreds of thousands of Persians, Kazakhs, and Russians were taken in raids in the 19th century and sold by the various Khanates in the slave markets of Central Asia. The men were usually put to work, and the women were often supplied to the harems of Muslim leaders. Both the Russian Empire and the British Empire wanted to hold sway in Central Asia, so ending slavery was a fitting pretext for invasion. By presenting themselves as civilizers, they could justify territorial expansion while exploiting the region's resources. This competition between the empires became known as the Great Game. In 1868, the Russians went to war with the Emirate of Bukhara and its capital, Bukhara, a center of slave trading in what is today part of Uzbekistan. The Russians won. They repeated this victory against the Khanate of Khiva in 1873, another major slave hub, which then became a Russian protectorate where slavery was soon abolished. In their conquest of Central Asia in 1881, the Russians fought the Teke tribe of Turkmens in what became known as the Battle of Göktepe, where about 7,200 Russians went up against 20 to 25,000 Turkmen at a fortress standing 28 miles from Turkmenistan's Ashgabat, the present capital city. Russian troops faced walls 18 feet high and 20 to 30 foot thick. They were vastly outnumbered, but they were an army with modern artillery fighting against nomadic traders whose conflict acumen was centered around raiding traveling caravans. The Russians did not have the supplies to maintain a siege and starve the Turkmen into submission, initially deciding on frontal assaults, which led to significant losses. With hundreds of Russian men killed and many more taken captive, the Russians made a hasty retreat through the desert to the Caspian Sea coast, only to return with new troops under a new commander, General Mikhail Skobelev. An experienced and wily man of war, on January 24, 1881, Skobelev had his men tunnel under the fortress and lay explosives. They blew up a large part of the walls, allowing the better-armed Russians to rush into the fort, where about 6,500 were killed and another 8,000 Turkmen soldiers and civilians were slaughtered in the aftermath. The Russians spared 5,000 or so women and freed the Persian slaves. Although the British, who were in a propaganda war with the Russians at the time, through the London Daily News reported no one was spared. Not even young children or the elderly. All were mercilessly cut down by Russian sabers. As all conflicts tend to be, the Great Game was a war of misinformation as well as military power. But there was some truth in what the newspaper said about barbarity. The surrendering men of the fort were slaughtered. The Russians then moved onward to Ashgabat, which was then just a small city, and on the way, the slaughter continued, including the murder of civilians. In Skobelev's own words, "The duration of the peace is in direct proportion to the slaughter you inflict upon the enemy. The harder you hit them, the longer they remain quiet." With this Machiavellian mindset to guide them, the Russians' Great Game ended with the domination of most of Central Asia. While there was no outright winner, the British protected its jewel in the crown, India, which included today's Myanmar, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. The two empires signed the Anglo-Russian Agreement in 1907, agreeing to accept each other's territory. So the Russians now had Turkmenistan, and the question now was, what were they going to do with a region of arid desert that had been completely untouched by European industry? This was a country that was 70% desert, the Karakum Desert, one of the driest places on Earth, which gets between 2.7 to 6 inches of rainfall per year, depending on the location, and whose recorded highest temperature is 122 degrees Fahrenheit, or 50 degrees Celsius. If we fast forward to the present day, it seems slavery or something close to slavery is alive and well in Turkmenistan. It's believed about 72,000 people in the country are forced to labor, something the government denies. However, human rights groups that have made the allegations are not allowed inside the country to inspect. These people are forcibly mobilized for work duties in what the human rights groups call, quote, widespread and systematic slavery. One of the things that the Russians discovered did grow in Turkmenistan was cotton. Today, about 198,000 tons of cotton are grown there each year, making it the fourth biggest export and a major contributor to the deep pockets of the elites. These elites own all the land, forcing farmers to lease and follow orders. From September to November each year is the harvest, a matter of the utmost importance regardless of a citizen's day job. The government decrees that when asked to pick the cotton, citizens must do their duty for a country that is presently the 9th largest cotton exporter in the world. This mobilizing of the masses includes public sector employees. Until very recently, even teachers and doctors had to commit to seasonal hard labor. If they didn't go, they would be fined or lose their jobs. Whether you were a man or a woman, whether you're sick or disabled, or even pregnant, if chosen, you must do your picking duty. Or at the very least, you must find someone to do it for you. While child labor is against the law, research shows that adults who were too busy working in their main jobs have sent their kids to the fields. Each of these workers is given a quota, which if they fail to meet it, they risk being punished. The farmers have no choice but to push the cotton pickers, since if they don't meet the expected supply numbers, they too will be punished. This practice of forced labor hurts the poorest the most, since citizens with more money often pay someone to take their place. As for women, Turkmenistan embraces very traditional values. Women quite often leave education early in order to procreate. If they work, they tend to earn less than men, a reason why so many cannot pay to avoid the yearly harvest. To keep the focus on women, girls in rural areas will often be guaranteed to a man when they're still young, with the future husband putting down a dowry of money, camels, or sheep. The women are expected to give birth as soon as they're in marriage. The younger, the better, which makes sense in a country with a present-day infant mortality rate of 35.9 deaths per 1,000 live births, in part due to a failing healthcare system. These numbers are a vast improvement on the past, too, when the leader closed down healthcare outside the capital city. Domestic violence is common and often viewed as standard practice in rural areas where women's rights are all but non-existent. One woman said of the antiquated values where she lives, "In our village, if you put on a sleeveless dress or one with a slight split, you would be immediately branded as a prostitute." Prostitution is illegal, but it still happens. During recent crackdowns, corrupt police extorted women on the streets, accusing any woman found in bars or nightclubs of being prostitutes simply because they were in a place where traditionally only men should be. Turkmenistan might be a ruthless dictatorship, but in the cities, people still like to party. In recent raids on clubs in Ashgabat, women were detained by anti-prostitution squads just because they were there. Some were merely celebrating a birthday, others were out with their husbands. The hypocrisy is astounding, given local women are regularly trafficked out of the country for sex, usually to Turkey, with corrupt officials blessing rite of passage after collecting bribes. These women, as well as many males who are not blessed with wealth, might want to escape to another country, so the government puts strict limits on freedom of movement. Many people try to get to Russia, Turkey, or India, and even if after a 2-year wait they secure a passport, there's no guarantee they'll get out. Recent news articles tell us scores of people who'd legally paid for tickets were stopped at the airport by officials and turned back. Some were told they were on a blacklist and were banned from leaving, but weren't given a reason. One report said border guards create various problems for citizens at the airport, do not allow them to board the plane, and force them to return. Occasionally, there will be a complete ban on traveling. In 2023, news reports said Turkmen women who were married to foreigners were not being permitted to leave the country. Some reportedly did, mostly heading to Turkey, but only after they paid bribes to corrupt officials at Ashgabat International Airport. In 2024, the government feared too many people were leaving, so citizens with passports were ordered to hand them in to the authorities. This included students, who were made to sign a declaration that they would not try to study abroad. Later, we'll explore how Turkmenistan's state-controlled media instills fear in the people by spreading propaganda that warns going abroad is dangerous. Like most nations, Turkmenistan doesn't want to lose its labor force or experience a brain drain. But keeping your best minds is a challenge in a country where citizens have no rights. This is not to say that all Turkmen cannot see through government propaganda. Many can, but they just can't do anything about it. The government rules through fear, as well as inculcating widespread ignorance. In 2024, a 75-year-old journalist and activist named Soltan Achilova was scheduled to attend a conference on human rights, but before she could leave the country, 4 men in white lab coats turned up at her apartment and bundled her into the back of a van. The men told her she'd been deemed high risk for spreading infectious diseases, took her to a hospital, and detained her there. The fear of infectious disease, a fear more exploitable since the global pandemic, has been weaponized in Turkmenistan. This is known as arbitrary forced confinement. It's what often happens to critics and activist bloggers who write about conditions in Turkmenistan. Some are sent to solitary confinement. Some are never seen again. According to the Prove They Are Alive campaign, since 2002, 162 people have disappeared after being arrested on vague charges. The campaigners say each of these missing people were considered political threats to absolute power. Let's now go back in history again, before we continue with the dystopian present. The Russian Empire had successfully expanded into Central Asia, but everything changed with the Russian Revolution. Turkmenistan became an anti-Bolshevik stronghold, resisting Soviet control until the Bolsheviks emerged victorious. In the 1920s, as the Soviet Union took shape, Turkmenistan's modern borders were officially drawn, integrating it into the USSR's network of republics. The plan was to industrialize the country and introduce collective farming. For decades, Russia had been beset by famines. Control of Central Asian agriculture was an attempt to prevent future mass starvation. Russian officials were sent to oversee the state-controlled collectives. Then, in 1953, Nikita Khrushchev became the first secretary of the Communist Party. He shook up the communist world with his criticism of the former leader, the tyrannical Joseph Stalin. Khrushchev immediately embarked on a campaign of reforms, introducing the Virgin Lands Campaign in 1954, designed to extract agricultural products from the Central Asian Soviets. The Russians built a canal in Turkmenistan that year that tripled the amount of arable land. At the same time, Russians were encouraged to move to Turkmenistan. They weren't there just to lead resource extraction, but as teachers in schools who would enlighten nomadic Turkmen families as to the glory of modern Russia. While cotton production soared after the canal's construction, Turkmenistan remained incredibly poor. Many of the wealthiest people were now Russian expatriates, who made up about 15% of a population that increased from 1.2 million to 1.5 million over a 20-year period. Cotton production increased from 150,000 tons per year to about 400,000 tons per year. This put Turkmenistan on the map of international trade. But much of the profits from the industry went back to Russia. The people felt like their land was being exploited, not for them, but for outsiders who knew little about their culture. Their belief was further confirmed in the 1960s, after the Russians discovered major gas fields in the Karakum Desert. In 1966, the Dawletabad gas field, close to the Iranian border, quickly became one of the largest gas fields in the world. During this era, the average life expectancy was about 55 years, one of the lowest in the Northern Hemisphere. Infant mortality rates were some of the worst in the world too, at 130.3 deaths per 1,000 live births. Literacy rates were also relatively very bad. In terms of data from other Soviet republics, Turkmenistan was being left behind in the Great Soviet Project. Moscow shipped off Russian officials and engineers to build pipelines, gas plants, and new transport networks, transforming a nation that had once been one of the most remote places on the planet. The oil continued to be pulled out of the ground in the direction of Russia and other Soviet republics, again leaving the Turkmen without much to show from what had become an oil boom. And now, parts of it were heavily polluted, while former tribal people, forced to work in the cotton farms and the gas plants, felt like their culture was being eradicated. The ecosystems they'd relied on for centuries were interrupted, no more evident than in the 1971 gas leak in Darvasa, right in the middle of the desert. To prevent deadly poisoning, Moscow ordered that the leak be ignited, creating a seemingly eternal flame that is now known as the Darvasa gas crater, a frightening conflagration that looks like it comes from the pits of hell. The Turkmen population was by then already familiar with natural disasters. In 1948, an earthquake near the capital wiped out up to 100,000 people, around 10% of the country's population. The Soviets did their best to keep the news under wraps, neither informing the rest of the world nor the Turkmen who lived in the rest of the country. This would, in time, generate more ill will towards the Soviet masters. One man who would later exploit this antipathy and distrust was the future Turkmen president, Saparmurat Niyazov. He lost his mother and 2 brothers in the earthquake, and his father had been killed fighting for the Soviets in World War II. With many of his other relatives dying in the earthquake, he was left an orphan. He would one day exploit this tragedy of youth to create a mythological stature for himself. The country was always ripe for a future dictator. During the days of natural resource exploitation, the Soviets closed down mosques, suppressing religion and religious leaders. Under the communist materialist belief, people's faith and energy should be directed toward the Union. Under Russification imperatives, the Soviets attempted to erase nomadic traditions that went back hundreds of years. They took men away from their cherished horses and sent them to work on collective farms. So, when the Soviet Union collapsed at the end of 1991, Turkmenistan was ready for a leader who would promise to reinvigorate national pride. Before the collapse, Niyazov had been the first secretary of the Communist Party of the Turkmen SSR. He took over from Muhammadnazar Gapurov, who'd led from the late 1960s but lost his job under a cloud of nepotism and corruption. While some aspects of the country did modernize during the oil and cotton boom days, corruption was a thread that ran throughout the fabric of existence in Turkmenistan. Niyazov would take that thread and make it into a blanket that smothered every inch of the country. He embarked on a mission to enrich himself and his powerful elite friends. Prior to that, he'd given his full support to the Communist Party. He'd supported the overthrow of the reformer, Mikhail Gorbachev. It was the communists who had put him in power, and he feared any change that would threaten that power. He knew very well there was resentment in his country coming from nationalists and Islamist hardliners. Political liberalization could be the end of him if his people were given rights of speech and expression. Moreover, Turkmenistan's entire economy was deeply tied to Russian trade agreements, infrastructure, resource management, and governance. With Moscow controlling everything from education to economic planning, Niyazov feared that breaking away from the Soviet Union would lead to total economic collapse. Nevertheless, the coup he supported failed, and Turkmenistan suddenly found itself floating in an independent reality, its anchor unhooked from its Soviet keeper. Fearing revolt and anxious over what political freedom might do to the status quo, Niyazov quickly made himself the leader of the Turkmens. In 1992, he rigged an election where he was the sole candidate, securing 99.5% of the vote. In 1994, he held a referendum to extend his term of office until 2002, claiming the people wanted him as their leader and that they feared instability would arise without him. 99.9% of voters agreed with him, an impossibility that would become a future of Turkmen life for many years to follow. Then, in 1999, he declared himself president for life. As he saw it, his best option was to rule with an iron fist, all the while promising freedom and prosperity as he propagandized the masses to ensure they didn't see the contradiction. The populace heard that their country, their once great and unique culture, would be revived. He said he'd usher in sweeping economic reforms. He said he'd write a constitution and create a political environment of checks and balances. If the people trusted him, he promised them a golden age, more comfort than they could imagine now that natural resource revenues were directed home rather than heading to Russia and the other Soviet republics. In reality, he was selling off those resources to Russia at bargain basement prices, although Russia still controlled the infrastructure, leaving Turkmenistan few options to become truly independent. As is the way of the totalitarian, Niyazov's influence gradually infiltrated every aspect of day-to-day life. He introduced a new Latin-based Turkmen alphabet in place of Russian Cyrillic. He invented a new history, partly based on facts and partly based on fantasy. He told his people he'd been blessed with a vision, a prophecy delivered to him that showed him the way to a golden path of life for the Turkmen people. This history and his visions were laid out in the book Ruhnama, a kind of quasi-holy text that was required reading for the entire population. This was how he developed his cult of personality, telling his people how he'd been orphaned from tragedy and how fate had chosen him to lead them after Soviet imperialism. The book tells its readers, and the entire nation, that he who reads the Rukhnama 3 times will find spiritual wealth, will become more intelligent, will recognize the divine existence, and will go straight to paradise. In churches and the mosques, the book lay at the side of the Bible and the Quran. Niyazov didn't claim to be God, but he was God's messenger. If you studied in school, you studied the Rukhnama. If you worked in government, the Rukhnama was always at your side. You couldn't get a job for the state without being fluent in this book, making it hard for minorities who couldn't read the Turkmen language to find employment. You couldn't even pass a driving test without knowing the Rukhnama inside and out. In short, understanding life was understanding the Rukhnama. As George Orwell had once written, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. This was the blueprint for Niyazov's leadership in a country that would carry on the national absurdity under its future leaders. In the early 2000s, the book was still the core of school curriculums, often replacing academic subjects that could potentially develop what was still a very backward nation. Young people spent hours per week in high school and university reading passages such as this: "The beard grows from the brain. The longer the beard, the less brain there is. The less brain, the less wisdom the person has." The book was said to be equal to the Quran and the Bible, and so at the center of the entire universe. Parents took their children to Ashgabat Park, where they could gaze at a 20-foot neon Rukhnama. In 2005, citizens were told that their national book would conquer space, with a copy of it being launched into orbit on a Russian Dnepr booster rocket. The national media, which as you'll see later only serves as propaganda, said, "The book that conquered the hearts of millions on Earth is now conquering space." Let's go back to the 1990s and take a closer look at the early days of Niyazov's reign. Niyazov wanted his people to feel proud of their independence, but Russia still had control over Turkmenistan's natural resources, using its infrastructure to buy gas very cheaply. Turkmenistan remained very poor outside of a few elites. Despite a struggling economy, Niyazov did everything in his power to placate his people, giving them free water, gas, and electricity, promising it would remain that way for 10 years. He wanted to be adulated, but his country couldn't afford his ostentatious kindness. He promised human rights, yet any criticism was met with detention without trial or forced disappearance. He banned prostitution, yet no sooner than he took over power, young girls were collected from provinces and sent to the city to entertain high-ranking officials. Reports say the girls were chosen for their beauty and their manners. They were going to Ashgabat to continue their education and one day be rewarded with a prestigious job. The parents didn't have a choice but to let their girls go. The women assigned to what was essentially kidnapping these girls first checked that the girls had pure blood. Aged 17 to 20, the girls also had to have healthy skin. They needed good teeth, and they had to be slim and beautiful. The women measured the girls to ensure they met the criteria. Reports state that the ones who weren't quite right, and perhaps not so pretty, didn't go to waste, but were sent to officials who held lower ranks. An article on the matter explained, if the girl does not qualify, then she is trained for other purposes. For instance, servicing the country's senior officials at receptions and other events. The girls are taught etiquette and polite manners, and are trained to properly set tableware and take away dishes. In the mid-90s, with Russia still getting away with resource exploitation, new oil pipelines were opened to Iran. A railway to Iran was also built, making it possible to ship cotton and other goods. Then, in 1998, Turkmen leaders met with President Bill Clinton and signed an agreement to expand economic and commercial relations with the US. The country was promised integration into the global economy, provided it agreed to privatization initiatives and followed the holy orders of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. In other words, the US was bringing Turkmenistan into its so-called sphere of influence because there were natural gas reserves to be had. Naturally, the US did not want all of this oil in Turkmenistan going to Iran and Russia. Clinton's office put out a press release telling the American people democratization, economic reform, and observance of human rights are essential to Turkmenistan's future. Free elections, human rights, the rule of law, and political pluralism, all with active support from the world's most powerful country. It sounded great on paper, but it was never going to happen. What the US really wanted, outside of promises to democracy, was the Trans-Caspian gas pipeline. It would connect gas reserves to Europe and away from Iran, Russia, and the US's future threat to its superpower status, China. However, close relations with the US came with its own set of risks, especially to the Turkmen elites who didn't want to lose their grip on power. It also seems, given the CIA's reputation, Niyazov was a believer in what the US diplomat and realist political scientist Henry Kissinger once said: "It may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal." After the meeting with Clinton, Russia signed an agreement to pay higher prices for oil, and Turkmenistan became a fast-growing economy. So, in what is sometimes called the new Great Game, Russia got what it wanted at a cost. Meanwhile, the US had a war on terror to fight, so interest in Turkmenistan took a back seat. In 2003, Russia and Turkmenistan signed another oil contract, this time for 25 years, on the condition that the Turkmen didn't sell gas to the West. In 2025, that contract is almost over. Turkmenistan is now flashing on the map of geopolitics. 80% of its gas now goes to China, and while Russia doesn't play as big a part, China doesn't want Turkmenistan's gas going to Europe. With the new oil deals, billions of dollars flooded into Turkmenistan in the late 90s and early 2000s, exporting about 13.2 to 15.4 trillion imperial gallons of natural gas per year. It was now one of Central Asia's biggest energy exporters. Did this mean the streets were paved with gold? Did it mean new state-of-the-art infrastructure, improved life expectancy, a cultural renaissance based on free expression? The answer is no. What it did mean was Swiss bank accounts and offshore companies filling up with stacks of foreign money. As most of the country suffered, Niyazov built beautiful statues of himself. He gave the people watches with dials with his face printed on them. He showed Turkmen what a great country they lived in when he erected his $12 million tripod, the so-called Neutrality Monument, a 246-foot edifice with elevators in its legs. The monument was to show that Turkmenistan was neutral in global politics. Was it neutral? Is it still neutral? Well, while it claims to be, it certainly looks closer to what Western propagandists call the new axis of evil: Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Back to Niyazov. He put his face on banknotes. He put it on the flag. His name was in the national anthem. He erected a 39-foot golden statue of himself on top of the Neutrality Monument that rotated so it could always face the sun. When broadcasts played on TV, his logo was always on the screen. Meanwhile, he professed humility, once saying, "I'm personally against seeing my pictures and statues in the streets, but it's what the people want." In his effort to build a great city that stood as a reflection of his godliness, he imported so much white marble from Italy that Ashgabat soon had more marble than any other city in the world. But this was the age of the internet, where his people could possibly read online about how terribly corrupt he was and how so insanely absurd their country could be. So, as you'd expect from a tyrant, he closed down internet cafes, the main place people could go online since few people had PCs. In 2005, only 0.7% of Turkmens had access to the internet, and many of those would have benefited from the corrupt system. Niyazov also closed the country's library. Just as China's dictator Chairman Mao had once said, Niyazov believed reading too many books is dangerous. He said his people only needed 3 books: the Bible, the Quran, and of course, Ruhnama. And as media propaganda told citizens how good their lives were, Niyazov shut down all hospitals outside the capital, saying if people were ill or injured, well, the best healthcare awaited them in the most wonderful city in the world. Doctors were fired en masse, and the ones that were left had to swear not the Hippocratic Oath, but an allegiance to their great leader. In total, 15,000 medical staff got the boot. They went from treating sick people to being handed guns as conscripted soldiers. In 2017, a doctor called Kursanae Ismatulayeva was fired because she wouldn't take bribes and give patients totally unnecessary treatments. She was detained immediately after her case was mentioned at a European Parliament meeting called Oppression Practices in Central Asia: Voices of Human Rights Defenders. It seems she was already under surveillance. News reports said men turned up at her house and took her away. Her family or friends were not told where they'd taken her. Her computers and phone were also confiscated. According to outside media, her enforced disappearance resulted in 9 years in prison on what were completely bogus charges. Reports state she grew very sick in prison and was denied a doctor despite losing a lot of her body weight. As corruption flourished and the nation was mismanaged, Niazov took away pensions from about a third of the population, resulting in the deaths of many elderly people. Despite this, Niazov maintained that dangerous foreign outsiders lied about his country. There were occasionally activists inside the nation who were collected from their homes and tortured with psychotropic drugs. Journalists and also religious minorities were taken to drug rehabilitation centers and treated with an injection. One victim said he became paralyzed after they dosed him with drugs. In what was surely another demonstration of Niazov's power, he even decreed that all dogs be banned from the capital, saying they carried an odor not suitable for his great white marble wonder. When he gave up smoking after a health scare, he told his people that smoking was now banned in all public places. That was around the time he banned the opera and ballet, erecting a giant ice palace in their wake. An ice palace in the middle of a country of scorching temperatures and desert. He also built a zoo and imported penguins. The reason for the palace, he said, was, quote, "Every child in Turkmenistan should learn how to ice skate." It was finished in 2006. However, the cost of the ambitious project was never revealed, but was rumored to be in the region of $29 million. It's not that the people of his country didn't deserve figure skating and hockey, but to have such a place in the world's oven while people were losing their pensions and went hungry seemed like an extravagance. Exciting news about palaces was delivered to Turkmen on TV channels where the presenters had been banned from wearing makeup. Real Turkmen, said Niazov, should be the color of wheat. In his decree about this, he wrote, "Female presenters wear too much whitening powder. Sometimes male presenters do the same. This cannot be allowed." The people were put to work, and cheap labor was imported into the capital to build 5-star hotels. Entire neighborhoods were demolished to make room for these luxuries. Meanwhile, many of those laborers lived on the outskirts in shipping containers. Some were addicted to the opium and heroin that had constantly flowed through Turkmenistan since Niazov took control, making officials wealthy, as drugs often do in developing nations. With this much power, there was, of course, opposition. In the early 2000s, flyers circulated in the capital, calling for Niazov to be overthrown. Then, on November 25, 2002, his motorcade was fired upon in broad daylight as it traveled through downtown Ashgabat. The bullets from the automatic weapons bounced off the bulletproof windows in his Mercedes-Benz without injuring anyone. As assassination attempts go, it was pathetic or conveniently low effort. Niazov went after his enemies immediately. It was said that he had the names of the conspirators before he got back to safety at the presidential palace. The blame was laid at the feet of Turkmen opposition in exile and foreign mercenaries, who he said were working with disloyal politicians in his government. It's now thought the reason he had the names so quickly is that the event was a false flag, a reason for him to remove the men he didn't deem loyal. False flag or not, he used the attack as an excuse to purge scores of men from his government. He demanded heightened surveillance in his country, weakening the little privacy already afforded to his people. CCTV cameras were set up in all public places by decree. He cracked down on freedom of movement and revoked dual citizenship for ethnic Russians. As a British researcher wrote, the unsuccessful coup attempt inadvertently abetted Niazov's propensity to lead his country into an ever greater state of isolation. He had more power than ever after the assassination attempt. He had secured oil deals with Iran and now also China, releasing his country from what had been dependency on Russia. And now he felt justified in making his nation more oppressive than it had ever been. Just as Niyazov was enjoying this unparalleled control, he fell to his knees on December 21st, 2006. Despite him having access to the best healthcare the world had to offer, his life of rich food and heavy alcohol consumption had caught up with him. This time, the assassin was cardiac arrest. He was just 66 years old, which statistically was about right, given the average life expectancy in his nation was somewhere between 64 and 66 at the time of his death. It was only 68 in 2021, although women on average in the 21st century could expect to live 5 to 7 years longer, a result of men doing most of the hazardous and stressful work, and their proclivity to smoke and drink, despite laws around limiting consumption of those drugs. After Niyazov's unexpected death, his country braced itself, just as Russia had done after the death of Stalin. The BBC wrote, Turkmenistan, which has large gas reserves, now faces an uncertain future, with rival groups and outside powers scrambling for influence. For the educated citizenry, there was some hope that their absurdist nation would become more open and democratic. Would this land of bizarreness lighten up and reverse Niyazov's many strange decrees? State news told the people to be calm and brave as they dealt with the, quote, severe ordeal which has befallen our nation. A week of mourning was to be observed, and New Year's celebrations were cancelled. The constitution demanded that the next in line would be Ovesgeldi Atayev, chairman of the Assembly of Turkmenistan. By law, it was decreed he'd become acting president during the chaos of a power vacuum. But it seems the elites deemed him not worthy. They had him arrested, claiming human rights abuse charges and abuse of power. It was a case of choosing the new elite and getting rid of the unwanted. The man who filled Niyazov's golden boots was Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, who at the time was one of the deputy prime ministers and the minister of health. Once he was acting president, he promised his people a free and fair election. What they got was a masquerade of the democratic process, in which he came away with 89% of the vote. The result caused international organizations to call the election a blatant sham. Now, as leader, just as Niyazov had done, Berdimuhamedov promised his people reforms. He said he'd bring back the pensions that had been taken away. He promised he'd put an end to the nepotism that had plagued his country. He'd weed out the corruption of the elites that had become wealthy from oil while leaving the rest of the nation to fight over scraps of meat. And he said he'd educate the people, and this would begin with a lesson in the cult of personality his predecessor had fine-tuned. Those days were over, he claimed. He'd free up the internet and people could see for themselves what the rest of the world said about Turkmenistan. He made good on some of those promises, including getting his people back on the internet. Today, around 2.5 million from a population of 7.3 million are online, whether via a home connection or mobile. As we'll explore later, these people might be online, but facing them is a firewall they would be reckless to try and bypass. This leaves them with not much internet diversity. Berdimuhamedov did give the people their pensions, but the freedom he promised, the end to nepotism, never materialized. He still intended to rob his country and rule by brute force. Berdimuhamedov wasn't just a man of modern-sounding reforms, he was cool as ice, glistening in the oasis of the Turkmenistan desert. In terms of optics, he was a dictator you could trust. Let's jump forward to 2021, as his term was coming to an end. That year, much of the population of Turkmenistan would have been watching their tightly controlled state TV channels when two young men appeared at a beach resort on the Caspian Sea about to sing a rap song. Turkmenistan was now hip-hop adjacent. One of the young men was the grandson of Mr. Berdimuhamedov. He joined them with fist bumps as they broke into song. A song very different in tone from the formal numbers Niyazov had written about his own vast greatness. The rap, sung in English, contained the line, "Life is so wonderful in my motherland, my splendid and dazzling Turkmenistan." Because everyone knows, when life is wonderful, you need to be constantly told it is. Berdimuhamedov was always on TV, doing something popular, smart, or brave. As everyone in Turkmenistan knows, he's not just good at rap, but also soccer, horse racing, motor racing, DJing, book writing, and shooting guns. You name it, he can do it, including being a very able guitarist. Over the years, he's often appeared on TV, playing and singing for his loyal people. In one such song, titled Ray of Happiness, he plays in front of clapping construction workers at a new gas plant. In the comments section of the YouTube video, people writing in Russian either compliment Berdimuhamedov's guitar playing skills or offer a short critique of authoritarianism. Someone asks why, when the workers played, their guitars were out of tune but Berdimuhamedov's wasn't. To which one person answered, "In Turkmenistan, it is forbidden to play better than the president." So, what Turkmen had with Berdimuhamedov was another cult of personality. It just wasn't quite as absurd as what came before. He was a tyrant, but to many of his people, he was the embodiment of cool, good at anything he put his hands to. He actually once fell off his horse in a race that was supposed to be for public consumption, but the accident showed imperfection, so the video was suppressed. Instead, the people saw him hanging out of fast-moving trucks, and one time watched him riding a bicycle with one hand and shooting a gun with the other. Compared to his predecessor, he was depicted as a lighthearted, much more forgiving ruler. He once gave Russian President Vladimir Putin a puppy, an act of sweetness that blurred reality. His PR team hired Jennifer Lopez to play at his 56th birthday, something she later said she regretted. It was reported she received $1 million for singing Happy Birthday, much to the outrage of many Westerners. But outside all his showmanship and propaganda, he was another multi-billionaire making a handful of elites in his country incredibly wealthy, all while the rest of the population suffered in silence. Despite his benign appearance, the rules remained the same about torture and enforced disappearance. Criticism was still absolutely verboten. Outside the country, US diplomatic cables exposed by WikiLeaks called Berdimuhamedov a vain liar accused of corruption on a vast scale. He was a control freak and enriched his family and friends through a culture of bribery, nepotism, and embezzlement. While Niyazov was a madman where decrees were concerned, Berdimuhamedov was said to be more corrupt, going as far as once accepting a $60 million yacht from a Russian gas company to merely speed up the conclusion of a deal. Berdimuhamedov enriched himself even more after he orchestrated the oil deals with China, although in some ways the country did prosper, hence small improvements in life expectancy. He reopened many of the medical clinics Niyazov had closed. He also improved the standard of higher education, significantly reducing the amount of studying of the great Ruhmana, taking it out of schools, churches, and mosques. He took down statues, did away with constant stultifying ceremonies, and he reopened libraries and even encouraged reading. However, most of the few bookstores in the country today are state-run, and in the private ones, the selection is meager. By 2015, 80 to 90% of the oil was headed to China. Berdimuhamedov used much of this money to make the White City even more wondrous than it already was. He built stadiums, sports complexes, and a tourist village said to look like a mini Las Vegas. This place is called Avaza, where you can get year-round mud therapy at a wellness sanatorium. He sang songs about it, among others he titled Prosperity and Protector. 23 hotels in this Central Asian Vegas cost about $5 billion. The pristine white capital of Ashgabat is indeed spotless, home to grand buildings, museums, and beautiful parks where you don't find a scrap of waste paper. But as Berdimuhamedov made this magnificent city, he rewrote the constitution and cracked down on dissent with zero tolerance. The authorities still use torture to attain confessions. There are still detentions without trials and forced disappearances of government critics. Amnesty International documented recent torture, which included pushing needles under fingernails, applying electric shocks, asphyxiation with a plastic bag, and the use of psychotropic drugs. While the activists are imprisoned, there are threats to their families. All the while, independent journalism in the country is met with more extreme intolerance. As this goes on, an estimated $28 billion sits in offshore bank accounts, profits from the new gas deals and cotton harvests, in what the people have been told is an area of happiness under Berdimuhamedov and later his son. There have been food rationing and reports of mass hunger. The government denies there's extreme poverty, making it impossible for international aid to flow. After gas prices plummeted in 2015 and food subsidies vanished, aid organizations were persona non grata and activists were punished if they talked about what was really going on. Meanwhile, Turkmenistan media regularly showed images of subsidized shops whose shelves were bursting with goods. If TV cameras visited cities where food lines were long, police broke up the lines and sent the people home. These government-subsidized stores were cheaper than the local market, but queuing up for hours could lead to someone going home empty-handed and still hungry. As the majority of people suffered, the government ushered in new rules, such as in 2018 when dark-colored cars were banned in Ashgabat. Black cars were towed from the streets, taken from the owners who were told either to respray it or lose them. A resident who earned $285 a month was told the repaint would cost almost $2,000 at a state-owned garage. If he waited a week more, it increased to $3,100. It was that or lose his vehicle. The people weren't even given a reason. Black cars were already banned for importation, which was likely in line with the city's white color scheme. Image is everything. In this swelteringly hot city, AC units were also banned from blocks of apartments, with the government saying they looked ugly. No one could argue about the beauty aspect. As people went hungry, a 606-foot-high monument to the Constitution was erected in 2011 that cost $60 million. A fairly recent new extravagance was a 19-foot statue of a golden dog, or to be exact, an alabai, Turkmenistan's national breed. The cost is unknown, but Turkmen politicians never scrimp on money. Berdimuhamedov's so-called Palace of Happiness, the place to be if citizens are getting married, cost $140 million. But the biggest extravagance of them all is the new Smart City, estimated to cost $3.3 billion. By the time it's fully finished, it will have risen to $4.8 billion. At least a smart city can lead to education and development of the economy. Still, you might wonder if a country that can't feed many of its citizens really needs a city that has tactile sidewalk tiles and a transportation infrastructure that makes New York or London look grubby. So, after all this, what's in store for this poor, oil-rich nation in the future? After Berdimuhamedov won 2 elections in 2012 and 2017 with about 97% of the vote, it was evident that the supposedly democratic nature of these elections was another farce. That doesn't mean he didn't have any support. In a non-official poll, 1 in 5 Turkmen said they'd check the box with Berdimuhamedov's name in it. Still, 20% isn't quite 97%. One man explained, "During Niyazov's rule, I lost 2 sons. Heroin took them both away from me when they were still young. I will forever be grateful to the president for eliminating drugs." Others liked Berdimuhamedov's reforms. One woman said she hadn't even heard of the other candidates. An official who wouldn't be named had a different reason. He said he and his colleagues at a prosecutor's office were informed by their bosses that if they didn't vote for Berdimuhamedov, they'd, quote, be considered a traitor. Let's now have a closer look at media communications in modern Turkmenistan. The constitution says that the press should be free, but in practice, all news is propaganda, whether privately owned or state media. TV consists of 5 channels, all strictly regulated. Turkmen do have satellite and cable, so people can watch certain shows from Russia, Turkey, and Uzbekistan, but they definitely won't have the option to see foreign journalistic deep dives on the country they call home. As for Western content through the internet, Turkmenistan blocks about 1/3 of all the world's IPs. There's no Netflix, no BBC News, no YouTube, no Rumble, or any other platforms where you could potentially watch a video about politics or poverty in Turkmenistan. Social media is also blocked, so that means no Facebook, X, Instagram or TikTok, etc. As for WhatsApp, well, that's complicated. We'll talk about this in a minute. Turkmenistan online news websites contain news about important foreign dignitaries visiting wonderful Turkmenistan, exciting business partnerships with other nations, plus a lot of other stories concerning industrial production booms. There isn't much bad news, so quite the opposite of the media in the rest of the world. Culture-based stories claimed Turkmen fairy tales were recently translated into some of the languages of the world, including English. Turkmen flowers, Turkmen food, Turkmen poems are also reaching a global audience. As for sports, the media covers the many accomplishments of its athletes, but there's very little information about sport outside of Turkmenistan. It's the same with travel, with many stories about the beauty of Turkmenistan, a fact seemingly drilled into the people as a matter of national pride. The rare crime stories that are reported consist of propaganda, a warning to all citizens thinking about leaving their great country. As for USA News, there was a story about 40 Turkmen who were deported from America and were sent back to Turkmenistan. These people, some of them reportedly the children of high-ranking officials, would be, quote, summoned for questioning. Overall, the news in Turkmenistan promotes a positive outlook, as long as citizens stay in the country and work hard for the benefit of everyone else. Turkmen media did carry a story about corrupt officials being called out for dereliction of duty, a popular article in totalitarian countries when someone needs to be replaced. In fact, outside news media in 2024 said officials increasingly exploit their positions to extort money. Bribery, said the article, is a way of life. Let's finish this media section with a lady named Sarigol Matyeva, who turned 117 in 2025. The article explained that she liked to tell her 97 great-grandchildren the answer to a happy life was don't sleep too much, don't be sad, and always have a goal. In other words, work hard and don't complain. As we mentioned earlier, social media is blocked in Turkmenistan if you don't have a VPN to get around the government's firewall. A risk, considering installing one is illegal, and there have been many arrests. In some cases, the arrestees were fined or given a 15-day jail sentence. Reports say businesses who helped people get VPNs risked being closed down. Students who need the internet the most to educate themselves were having to sign declarations, swearing not to access prohibited websites and to go online only for educational purposes. Reports in 2021 said some citizens had waited years to get their Wi-Fi connection, and once they did, the officials made them swear on the Quran to never circumvent the firewall. However, it seems some Turkmen do get online from time to time and visit banned websites. Those who do get online are often found defending their nation, stating they do not live in a place comparable to North Korea. Some said they watch news about the world, go to bars, and drink alcohol, and even smoke in public. Their point was they're just like you, and not as oppressed as people might think they are. Still, it's a fact that few people in the country would have access to this video, and fewer still would air a criticism of their country or leaders in a public forum. That said, there have been recent signs that some light might penetrate the black hole that is Turkmenistan's communications complex. A recent news article said WhatsApp might be unblocked in the country, and Turkmen people would be able to use it, quote, like people in the rest of the world. Turkmen people do at least have phones, with 6.25 million mobile cellular subscriptions in 2021, equating to a mobile penetration rate of 99 subscriptions per 100 inhabitants. There were 2.59 million internet users at the beginning of 2024, with an internet penetration of 39.5%. Still, that means 60.5% don't have an internet connection, with many of those people living in rural areas. As for the state of politics in the present day, Berdimuhamedov could have stayed in office until 2024, but after a snap election in 2022, a new man came to power. This is where the word dynasty comes into the equation, because Turkmenistan's new leader was none other than one of his sons, Serdar Berdimuhamedov. In what was another sham election, he won easily with 72.9% of the vote. He now rules with an iron fist and his father at his side. The state media calls him the son of the nation, a sure sign he'll develop his own cult of personality. but more akin to his father than Nyazov's divine ruler scheme. In 2025, it is hard to get away with saying you're divine, and harder still to commit mass atrocities. Totalitarianism has evolved to meet with modernity, and it involves heavy doses of PR. Indeed, Serdar is young, handsome, and speaks English, which might make him more appealing to a modern audience. In 2024, Turkmenistan reported a 6.3% increase in GDP. Although it's not certain if this is exact, still, GDP projections are positive, with the new young leader saying he will invest $11 billion towards infrastructure and modernization. The recent Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, or TAPI pipeline is set to add some more boom to what the politicians say will be a more diverse economy in the near future. A new pipeline to Turkey is also on the way, further enhancing Turkmenistan as a major player as European nations seek to reduce their reliance on Russia. The country is now the world's fourth largest reserve of natural gas, with 50% of its GDP coming from gas exports. 2023 saw an all-time high GDP of $60.6 billion a year, but Turkmenistan is still quite poor. With such a small population, a GDP per capita at over $8,000 is better than Thailand, Colombia, and South Africa, and much better than Guatemala, Iran, and Vietnam. Of course, GDP per capita doesn't mean much when you have a criminally extreme wealth disparity in your country. As you've learned, so much of that oil money is sucked out by the elites. These people build beautiful streets and monuments for fame and glory while stuffing their people's potential future well-being into offshore bank accounts. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MapPack. Whether it's having to follow strict moose regulations, organizing a festival to commemorate river ice breaking, or living with more sled dogs than people, there's a lot of seemingly unbelievable facts about living in Alaska. So, here are 50 more unbelievable facts about what life in Alaska is really like. Fact number 50. You can't whisper in someone's ear when they're moose hunting. Why you'd want to startle someone carrying a gun big enough to bring down a moose is anyone's guess. But just in case you were planning on testing Darwin's theory of natural selection out, you should know that in addition to being a bad idea, it's illegal. If someone has their sights locked on a 1,300-pound, 590-kilogram animal, the last thing you want to do is break their focus. If that animal notices you're there and decides to charge you first, let's just say it's a terrible survival strategy. Number 49. You also can't push a moose from a plane. Again, we have to wonder what situations Alaskans are finding themselves in that made such legislation necessary. However, there's a lot of moose-specific legislation that makes sense, even if it sounds silly at first glance, like not being allowed to see moose from an airplane. What the law actually wants to prevent is hunters using planes to spot a moose and kill it. Hunters can only check for moose the day before to give the animal a chance to move and a fair fighting chance against being killed. Fact number 48. In Alaska, you can visit the place where Santa's letters are sent. The town of North Pole, Alaska is a community of 1,600 people about a 15-minute drive south of Fairbanks that receives tens of thousands of letters for Santa Claus from children all over the world. Volunteers actually answer a lot of the letters, at least those that arrive with a return address, and include a postmark from the North Pole. The town lives up to its Christmassy reputation in other ways as well, with a Santa Claus house featured as a tourist attraction. Don't expect Alaska to live up to this efficiency when you try to get other things sent through, though. Because, fact number 47, shipping costs will become the bane of your existence. If you can even get the product or piece of furniture you want up to Alaska, be prepared to pay through the nose for it. Anderson Trucking Service estimates, based on their experience, that shipping to Alaska is 3 to 5 times more expensive than shipping to the lower 48. Number 46. In Alaska, it's either winter season or roadwork season. you never really get a great driving experience as part of your daily life. You're either battling snowstorms behind the wheel of your truck or waiting for the weather to clear, only to run headfirst into road construction. Those rare weeks when it's not snowing, pouring rain, or cold enough to freeze your eyelashes, that's the only time crews can work. So good luck driving anywhere without delays. Fact number 45. You're prepared for snow. But are you prepared for rain? Forget Washington. Alaska is actually the 5th rainiest state in the US, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. Alaska gets around 20 inches, 51 centimeters of rain a year overall, but some parts of the state, like Ketchikan, get absolutely flooded with 150 inches, 381 centimeters of rain a year. The high levels of rain are caused by moist air from the ocean moving over the land and almost immediately being forced up by one of the state's many mountains. So in addition to snow boots, get a good raincoat. And speaking of gear, fact number 44. Many people have a pair of yak tracks in their car, if they're not actively wearing them out and about on snowy or icier days. This traction device is made up of steel coils and rubber bands and are meant to be put over the bottom of your shoes on days when the ground seems more like a slip and slide. Just be careful to take them off when conditions return to normal, as they will cause you to lose your balance on days with dry conditions. And days with dry conditions are no walk in the park either, because fact number 43, even if you've never had a moisturizing routine, living in Alaska might convince you it's time to start one. The air is so dry in the south, with the central heating systems constantly running inside homes making things even drier, that you might see your skin start to flake and crack, especially if you've moved from a humid climate. Fact number 42. Alaska has the most expensive healthcare in the US. Researchers at the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation ranked Alaska first in the country after analyzing over 40 billion insurance claims during the 2010s and found that Alaska has the highest expenses at over $9,200 per capita. The high costs are due to a combination of factors, including the state's very difficult geography distances making transporting patients and supplies incredibly expensive. Also, the state has a low population, which means less competition among medical providers, driving prices up. And many Alaskans seem reluctant to seek preventative care, which we'll get to soon, leading to their hospital bills being way higher when they do seek medical attention. Fact number 41. Some remote communities in Alaska don't have a single local police officer to call. Over 70 Alaska villages, most if not all of them indigenous, don't have local police. Advocacy groups have been pressing the state to copy their health program to institute policing, as every single one of those villages does have a health clinic. The bad news is even the indigenous towns that have police officers usually don't have a native officer. While 95% of health aides are native, less than half of VPSOs, peace officers trained in law enforcement and medical assistance, are native. This can lead to some issues with distrust, communication breakdown, and occasionally racism. Unfortunately, rates of domestic violence and assault are very high in Alaska, and a relative lack of policing doesn't help matters. Fact number 40. Cancer is one of the state's leading causes of death, and yet 40% of women over age 40 had not received a mammogram in the past 2 years. 56.2% of adults between the ages of 50 and 75 had done no screenings for colorectal cancer. What's the reason for this? Well, doctors believe it's a combination of healthcare being geographically or financially inaccessible for many Alaskans. Couple that with a sense of rugged individualism many residents seem to have that leads them to turn to professionals less often than others. Fact number 39. People in Alaska really rely on each other, especially in smaller communities. The Alaska Housing Finance Corporation found that almost 75% of Alaska residents say they feel a strong sense of community in their area and know their neighbors well. That's compared to 51% of Americans in general who say they feel very or somewhat connected to their neighborhoods, according to the Survey Center on American Life in 2021. With housing, groceries, heating, and winter gear being so expensive, a lot of people in Alaska are really struggling to get by. You can lean on your neighbors for borrowing items here and there, even food if you need it, and be prepared to give back as well. Everyone understands that being left alone up here in the cold could quite literally kill you, and communities tend to prop each other up. Fact 38. Alaska attracts a lot of people for seasonal jobs in tourism and wildlife, or temporary jobs working at oil and gas sites and fishing. According to Alaska Business Magazine, Alaska has the highest number of seasonal workers in the nation. They give the example of 2017 employment, in which the Alaska Department of Labor noted that non-farm employment rose from 310,000 jobs in January to 353,100 jobs in July, an increase of 13.9% that happens annually. Between 5 to 7% of the population enters and/or leaves the state for long periods of time each year. Number 37. In addition to Alaska being very far from the lower 48 states, flight times to the rest of the country are usually pretty strange. A lot of flights leave Anchorage and Fairbanks airports between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m., with a significant amount departing between midnight and 2 a.m. The stated reason by the airlines is so they can make West Coast and Midwest connections and get to the East Coast on the same day. Number 36. People living in Alaska often describe the experience as feeling like they're living in another country rather than another state of the U.S. Even direct flights to major U.S. cities take at least 5 hours and, as previously mentioned, usually leave at very specific, inconvenient times in the middle of the night. Fact number 35. Alaska has the lowest tax burden of any U.S. state, according to both WalletHub and the Tax Foundation. There is no individual income tax on the state level and no statewide sales tax, though some communities do institute a small local sales tax. But this still makes the statewide sales tax rate average out at 1.82%. There is a property tax rate, but it averages out to an effective rate of 1.16%. Number 34. Alaska has the second lowest percentage of residents aged 65 and over. Even though the cost of living is relatively high, Alaska can be a great place to live in retirement, especially when you take into account the permanent fund dividend, which gives local citizens a yearly stipend from oil and gas profits. Not to mention the state's clean air. You won't believe just how clean in a moment, and absolutely stunning nature. Fact number 33. 90% of air quality monitoring sites in Alaska have moderate to good air quality, making Alaska a state with some of the cleanest air in the U.S. In fact, in 2023, it had the second best air quality index, AQI, in the country with a rating of 27.9, beat out by only Hawaii. However, you might face problems in the wintertime in cities like Fairbanks due to lots of people using wood fires to keep warm, or if you're near oil and gas extraction sites, making the air quality poorer in those places. But overall, thanks to Alaska's vast stretches of pristine forests and wilderness, residents will be able to breathe a little better up here than in most places. Fact 32. The state has an anti-degradation law which protects its waterways as well, and sets certain tests and standards before Alaska can decide to allow pollution in any body of water. That's why 99% of Alaska's waterways are rated as having exceptional water quality. 90% of surface waters are moderately clean to clean, according to the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. Fact 31. You can see the Northern Lights on average 243 days a year in Fairbanks. For locals, the Aurora Borealis is not a rare one-off sight, but rather a frequent occurrence they get to enjoy as a reward for enduring the long Alaskan winters. That's because the town is right under something called the Auroral Oval, which is where aurora activity is most intense, and Northern Lights season in Fairbanks runs from August 21st to April 21st. Fact number 30. Almost everyone in Alaska has blackout curtains, because they're extremely necessary, except in the winter. As harsh and dark as Alaskan winters are, and for some people they're really bad, as you'll soon find out, the summers can be even worse. The residents of Fairbanks get to experience the midnight sun, which is 70 straight days of sunlight from around May 17th to July 27th. Even people living in Anchorage and Juneau, which don't technically get a full 24 hours of the sun in the sky, still get 22 hours of direct sunlight. and when the sun dips below the horizon for a bit, things don't fully go dark. Fact number 29. In winter, seasonal affective disorder makes people's mental health problems really bad. Something about not seeing the sun for months on end and dealing with bitter cold days and cabin fever can affect even the hardiest residents. The suicide rate in Alaska is high, sometimes close to double the national average. In 2022, for example, the suicide rate in Alaska was 27.6 per 100,000 people, compared to 14.2 per 100,000 people nationwide. Number 28. Drug abuse is also a major problem in Alaska. It ranks in the top 10 states for illicit drug use and leads the nation in rates of alcoholism. 38% of Alaskan men and 13% of Alaskan women are classified as binge drinkers, compared to national rates of 24.3% of men and 19.2% of women. When it comes to drugs, around 9% of Alaskans are so addicted that they need to enter rehab, though most won't choose or be able to afford to do so. Unfortunately, this leads to a lot of people in the state never getting the help they need. In 2024, Alaska had the second highest rate of drug overdose deaths in the country at 53 per 100,000 people, behind only West Virginia. Fact number 27. Most Alaskans either take vitamin D during the winter or use light therapy boxes to mimic the effect of sunlight on their body. Vitamin D is necessary because it's something the body naturally produces when exposed to the sun. This means people in Alaska cease producing it altogether for months in a row, and it's necessary for things like absorbing calcium and keeping bones healthy. The light therapy boxes, or lamps, are known as happy lights, and it can be enough for some people to stave off severe depression. Number 26. Alaska is widely considered the most outdoorsy state in America, despite the frigid climate. 81% of the population is involved in outdoor activities. While this is great for getting out and about, if your hobbies don't include hunting, fishing, and/or snow sports, you may be out of luck. According to new transplants, the relatively low and low-density population makes finding hobby groups for things you love a little difficult if they don't fit into those categories. Number 25. Alaska's state fair is a pretty big deal. Over 300,000 other people attend, almost half the state's population. It's held in Palmer around late August and early September and is by far the state's largest event. The fair sets up an amusement park, carnival games, a concert series with plenty of famous musicians flying into town, vendors with native crafts, and most Alaskan of all, giant award-winning vegetables on display. Number 24. There's no end to the quirky, fun festivals Alaskans have come up with to bring the whole community together. The Bear Paw Festival features the Slippery Salmon Olympics. Relay teams race with an open soda bottle and dead salmon, passing them off to other team members until the race is completed. Fact 23. In the late fall, Alaskans will start chatting about termination dust. The term originates from when white snow would start to pile up on the tops of nearby mountains, signaling to Alaskan miners that it was time to pack up their things and start shutting down the mines for the season. The term became so embedded in Alaskan culture that to this day, people will have conversations about when the termination dust is likely to appear, how early or late it did appear, and what it might mean for the winter ahead. Fact number 22. Summer is ending when the top of the fireweed plant finally blooms. The pinkish-purplish fireweed plants, so named because they usually bloom in fire-affected landscapes, flower throughout the Alaskan summer and bloom from bottom to top, unlike most other plant species. So when the bloom finally reaches the top and starts to fade, Alaskans know their beautiful sunny summer is coming to a close. There's even a phrase that says when firewood turns to cotton, summer will soon be forgotten. Fact number 21. Just like termination dust and dying fireweed plants signal the beginning of winter, spring breakups often mean that summer is coming. This is when the surface ice on rivers like the Yukon breaks apart and starts to flow downriver. It's a pretty momentous event, and the ice that breaks apart can be so big that it leads to some destruction in the area, including downed trees. In fact, there's a festival called the Nenana Ice Classic, in which locals bet on the exact time that the Tanana River ice will break up and send a spruce into the water. Fact number 20. Travel and Leisure voted Anchorage the worst dressed city in the United States. Locals didn't really care because their daily fashion prioritizes retaining body heat rather than looking like they stepped off the cover of Vogue. Flannels and parkas may not be all the rage on the runways, but Alaskans care about dressing practically and comfortably for most, if not all, of the year. Number 19. Urban fishing is a real thing. Locals often stop off at Ship Creek, close to 2nd Avenue in Anchorage, to fish after work, especially during salmon runs. Though it's not considered one of the best fishing spots in the country, it's a nice way for city dwellers to relax and enjoy some nature-based activities during the day. Number 18. Life inside and outside of Anchorage can be very different. 40% of the state population is inside Anchorage, and Alaska's biggest city has plenty of entertainment, shopping, and dining options. Once you leave the city limits, life can get a lot more rugged. To give you an idea of how different the rest of Alaska is, while Anchorage has a population of around 283,000 in 2025, the two next biggest cities, Fairbanks and Juneau, barely have over 30,000 people each. That's not even considered a city in the rest of the US. Residents often ask newcomers if they're moving to Anchorage or the bush, i.e., the 80% of settlements only accessible by boat or plane. Fact number 17. Some people in Alaska, especially those in the bush, really do still live off the land. That's because a high percentage of Alaskans, almost 20%, live in what are classified as frontier and remote areas, or, fittingly, far areas. This means it's more than an hour's commute away from the nearest population center of 50,000 people. That's compared to 3.9% of the US population at large living in such areas. Fact number 16. Alaska has communities called fish camps, annual temporary settlements where people from interior villages will move and spend their summer fishing, mostly for salmon. This is to feed themselves, their sled dogs, and sell the extra catch for profit, either whole or cured. The practice of going to fish camps and learning traditional skills from family members is an Alaskan native tradition. It's cultivated over generations to pass on knowledge about the land, its wildlife, native culture, and how to care for and live off the environment. Unfortunately, due to failing salmon runs in the early 2020s, fishing has been severely restricted or banned in many parts of the river, leaving these communities in distress. Fact number 15. Another interesting fact about life in Alaska is the actual use of sled dogs for work and transportation in Alaskan villages, to the point where sled dogs outnumber people in some places. This is especially true in places along the Iditarod Trail. In some remote parts of the state, sled dogs are not only man's best friend, but also man's only way to really get around for most of the year. The dogs used for sledding are usually a hardy mix of Malamutes, Huskies, and other winter weather breeds with double-coated fur, allowing them to thrive in the Alaskan winter and wilderness. Number 14. The other way of getting around in the remote Alaskan wilderness in wintertime is by snowmobile or snow machines. Many Alaskans rely on snow machines for so many critical tasks during the winter that to call it a snowmobile associated with a leisurely, fun activity seems wrong. If you're from out of town, you can still call it a snowmobile and people will know what you mean, but they will know you're an out-of-towner. Number 13. Residents who don't want to wander around in the Alaskan winter and don't like winter sports better enjoy being inside their homes almost 24/7 during the winter months. One new resident of Alaska who moved to the state in October describes how she met loads of her very kind neighbors in May. In her words, you may truly never see 80% of your neighbors outside their houses until after the snow melts. Fact number 12. Summer is the non-hibernation season for bears, so it's advisable to hike with bear spray. Most of the locals have a can when they head out into the wilderness because the last thing you want to do is underestimate the presence of bears in a state that has 140,000 of them. The sprays aren't meant to cause any long-term damage to the bears. They usually have red pepper extract, known as capsaicin, which will temporarily stop and incapacitate a bear, but leave it otherwise unharmed. Fact number 11. Some of the wildlife that is harmed on the road ends up becoming the property of the state. Some 800 to 1,000 moose die annually on Alaskan roads, as high-speed highways cut through prime moose territory. In the 1970s, the state had an idea. It didn't make sense to let tens of thousands of pounds of edible meat go to waste when many Alaskans were struggling. So now, the state expects citizens who crash into big game animals, or troopers who find them dead on the side of the road, to report them to the state. After that, the animal will be butchered and most likely distributed to charity organizations. Fact number 10. Alaska has its own Big Mac. Called the Denali Mac, it's only available in McDonald's stores throughout Alaska. The Denali Mac is pretty similar to the traditional Big Mac, with the exception that it uses 2 quarter-pound beef patties instead of the regular small patties, and more sauce than your average McDonald's burger. This makes the Denali Mac a whopping 880 calories, perfect for putting some fat on you to keep you warm for the Alaskan winter. Fact number 9. Despite Alaska being a solidly red state voting-wise, it was one of the first to legalize marijuana on February 24, 2015, right after Colorado and Washington. According to Statista, Alaska ranks 4th nationwide in marijuana use, with 32.45% of residents having smoked weed within the last year, designated as 2022 by the study. High rates of weed use are partly a result of Alaska's rather more libertarian than conservative leanings. Fact number 8. The land of Alaska might be sparsely populated, but depending on where you live, your house may not be. Finding housing is a real problem in Alaska. Housing prices are high, most of the land is owned by the federal government and can't be developed, and it's hard to build in general. That means that people can tend to cram into housing that's inadequate for their family. The Alaska Housing Finance Corporation found that over half of Alaskan households in the rural parts of the state are overcrowded. Fact number 7. Alaska has a brain drain problem. In 2025, the Alaska Department of Labor and Workforce Development reported that more people moved out of Alaska than moved in for the 12th year in a row. What makes the issue of immigration worse is that most people moving out tend to be working-age adults. Meanwhile, many of those moving in are retirees or only coming in temporarily. Fact number 6. Outside of oil, gas, and construction, most careers in Alaska don't offer much in terms of advancement or progress. That's not to say you can't find well-paying jobs in other sectors, but people who want to move up the ladder or specialize may find it hard to do in a statewide market of just 740,000 people. Fact number 5. The Alaskan economy is very dependent on resources, from oil and gas to fishing and timber. This provides plenty of relatively well-paying jobs to locals and incoming workers, but it also means the state's economy can slide up and down a lot depending on how the market for these products is doing. Number 4. Some Alaskans try to save money by living in what's called a dry cabin. This cabin functions more or less like a normal house, with the exception that it has no running water or plumbing. So that means no well, waste disposal, internal faucets, or septic system. Many places in Alaska have such thick permafrost that digging to install wells or septic systems is almost impossible, leading to the existence of so many dry cabins within the state. Not to mention, pipes can easily freeze and burst in the harsh winters. The upside is that dry cabins are on average cheaper to rent and buy than regular homes. There are downsides, however. Residents have to either haul water jugs, collect rainwater, or set up a whole water delivery and filtration system, or all three. Number 3. Hunting isn't just a sport in Alaska. Many people living in remote areas legitimately hunt to eat, bringing down a couple of large game animals to fill up their freezer for the winter. According to Alaska Fish and Game data, 25% of Alaskans in general hunt, but in rural areas, 79 to 92% of households hunt for subsistence. Fact number 2. Once you live in Alaska, everywhere else will feel crowded and dirty. It's a common observation among those who have lived in the state for a few years, or even more so for their whole lives, that visiting family in the contiguous 48 US states is often a type of culture shock. Cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, or even relatively small lower 48 cities can feel incredibly crowded, dirty, and removed from nature. And finally, fact number 1. Alaska has a horrific mosquito problem. You may not expect to find clouds and swarms of mosquitoes this far north, but those who try to do anything outside during the summer know their statewide nightmare very well. Alaska is made up of over 14% water, and the many wetlands make perfect breeding grounds for blood-sucking mosquitoes. There are 35 species found within Alaska, but the most common is, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Alaskan mosquito, known for its aggressiveness. Locals prepare with repellent, clothing protection, and putting in screens everywhere they can, but somehow it isn't enough. Mosquito bites are just part of living in Alaska. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack. On paper, Japan shouldn't exist. Mountains eat up 80% of the land. Farmland barely exists. Energy shipped in from abroad. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, all waiting to wipe it out. And yet, Japan is one of the largest economies on Earth. How? Turns out, this challenging landscape might be the country's greatest strength and its biggest weakness. Today on MatPack, we dive into why Japan's geography works. And if you enjoy these weekly map marathons, hit subscribe so I can keep avoiding normal hobbies. Fact 50. Japan is an archipelago with over 6,800 islands in total, and around 6,000 are uninhabited. Connecting them into a unified country with accessible transportation has been a giant headache for most of Japan's history. Not to mention, those islands stretch over 1,900 miles, over 3,000 kilometers. If you dropped Japan onto North America, it'd reach from Halifax straight down to Florida. However, Japan's long stretch from north to south brings an unexpected benefit. You can experience everything from alpine winters to tropical summers in a single trip, from Hokkaido's ski resorts to Hateruma's subtropical beaches in Okinawa. Number 49, Japan may look small on the map, but it hides a whopping 18,500-mile coastline, longer than America's, and it's not for sunbathing. Those shores are stacked with natural deep-water gateways like Tokyo, Yokohama, and Kobe that powered Japan's rise in global trade. Today, the country runs over 1,000 ports, from mega hubs to tiny fishing harbors. Australia, 20 times bigger, manages only 70, but hey, they've got kangaroos. Number 48. If you've ever wondered why Japan experiences so many natural disasters, it's because the country is located on the infamous Ring of Fire, where 4 tectonic plates collide. This leaves it vulnerable to earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions, as it also has at least 186 volcanoes sitting in and around it, 60 of them currently active. However, the same tectonic plate location that causes the country so many headaches created Japan to begin with. The island rose through the surface of the ocean due to the area's tectonic activity. Number 47. Japan is the 62nd biggest country in the world, with just under 147,000 square miles, about 381,000 square kilometers. But looks can be deceiving. Japan has islands, lots of them, and they're basically cheat codes for ocean real estate. Scattered across the Pacific, they give Japan the 8th largest exclusive economic zone in the world, in ocean territory 12 times its land size. That's space to fish, drill, explore, and research, all unlocked by a string of islands that make Japan look small on the map, but huge at sea. Fact 46. For decades, Japan was the heavyweight champ of fishing, hauling in more than anyone else from the 1930s to the 1980s. These days, the catch isn't quite as impressive. Overfishing and rivals muscling in have knocked Japan down the rankings, but it's still holding strong in the top dozen. And when the ocean pushed back, Japan got clever. Instead of only chasing fish, it started farming the sea. Bays and estuaries were turned into underwater pastures, raising shellfish, seaweed, and more. Now those ocean farms crank out even more than the traditional fleets, proof that Japan didn't just fish the sea, it hacked it. Number 45. When it comes to food, it's a good thing Japan has so much access to fish and marine life around it, because its land isn't exactly what you'd call farmer-friendly. Only about 20% of the country's land can be farmed. Honestly, it's a miracle the place became an empire at all. Other rich countries tend to have much more potential farming land available. Germany, similar in size, has 33.4% arable land. The largest stretch of flat arable land is the Kanto Plain, and it's no coincidence that Japan put its capital and biggest city, Tokyo, right on top of it. And if farming wasn't hard enough, Japan's geography throws in another cruel twist. The ground itself can't be trusted to stay still. Fact 44. Since 1995, Japan has experienced over 70 earthquakes of magnitude 6 and above. Since 80% of the world's earthquakes occur on the Ring of Fire, that's not too surprising, but the damage it has caused to Japan has been wildly costly in terms of both money and human lives. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake and resulting tsunami has been called the costliest disaster in history. It was a magnitude 9.1 earthquake off the coast of Honshu, and the resulting tsunami caused $300 billion in damage, with 19,000 people losing their lives. After the Tohoku quake and tsunami had both subsided, 450,000 people were left homeless. Fact 43, let's get back to agriculture. Why does Japan have such little land available for farming? It mostly has to do with the never-ending mountains running through most of its four main islands: Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. Various sources list Japan as 75 to 80% mountainous, which is great for Instagram shots of Mount Fuji, but likes aren't much help when it comes to uniting a country under one government. For most of Japan's history, the mountain ranges were a problem, giving rise to a decentralized feudal system that lasted until the Meiji Restoration in 1868. Even modern technology and development hasn't completely erased these feudal boundaries. The country's 47 prefectures still roughly follow the mountain boundaries of former feudal territories. Number 42, this fragmented system, combined with the difficulty of uniting isolated communities, left much of the real power in the hands of rural villages and families. Until 1600, even local rulers lacked true national authority. Villages relied on their own councils to maintain order, protect water rights, and collect taxes, retaining independence from regional governments and fostering a communal approach to problem solving. Many experts attribute the modern Japanese ethos of collectivism, at least in part, to this feudal system of government. Number 41. Culturally, Japan's mountains and its natural beauty have inspired some of the nation's most famous traditions. Zen gardens, tea houses, flower arranging, and even ink painting all draw in some way from the grandeur of a wild landscape that covers most of the country. They also feature prominently in the Shinto religion, still followed by over 48% of Japan today. It places emphasis on mountains as the home of gods and spirits, known as kami. Fact number 40. Thanks to the lack of suitable farming land, a lot of Japan's wild nature has been left untouched, resulting in acres and acres of pristine forests, approximately 66.7% of the national land area. By comparison, only 40% of Canada is forested, and just 33% of the US and Germany. This not only gives Japan endless wilderness to admire and explore, but also gives a massive natural carbon sink. According to Climate Scorecard, its forests absorb 15 million tons of CO2 each year, a significant boost toward the goal of carbon neutrality by 2050, assuming they don't cut it all down to build parking lots. Fact 39. Japan's geography is a paradox. Mountains steal farmland, islands scatter people, and the sea starves crops. Yet each one flips into a strength. But one problem was harder to spin: getting around. The steep ranges split communities, so Japan blasted tunnels, raised viaducts, and built the Shinkansen, a bullet train rocketing across the country at 200 miles an hour, 322 kilometers an hour, mostly to reach somewhere else that's just as mountainous, only faster. The first line cost a staggering 1.8 trillion yen, up to 3.6 billion per kilometer. And when mountains weren't enough, Japan decided to flex even more and drilled straight under the sea, linking Honshu to Hokkaido with a tunnel even longer than the Channel Tunnel between the UK and France. Number 38, yet in an ongoing trend for Japan, and in this video, all these mountains contributed to a positive side effect: the rapid urbanization of the country. Despite having the 11th largest population in the world, Japan isn't that big. similar to the state of California, but with more than 3 times its population. And the country's many, many mountains, have I mentioned the mountains before, are closed off to large human settlements. That means Japan's population has to squeeze into about a third of its land area, the size of South Korea. No wonder it feels crowded. Number 37. Japan is a nation of city dwellers. Out of 123 million people, nearly all are packed into urban centers, since mountains and forests swallow most of the countryside. Tokyo alone has 38 million people. That's more than New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles combined. Plenty of options on the dating apps, but good luck finding somewhere that isn't already booked for dinner. Fact 36. In an effort to expand the area available for urbanization, Japanese engineers and urban designers also became masters of land reclamation. And this started in the country way back in the Edo period, in the 1600s. To keep expanding, Tokyo's residents filled in the wetlands around the imperial palace, a practice repeated throughout the modern era as the city sprawled in every direction. Today, around 20% of the surface area of Tokyo Bay has been reclaimed by the city, hosting major projects like Tokyo International Airport, Disneyland, and Yokohama Seaport. Fact number 35. Because most Japanese people live in places where you can't swing your arm without hitting 5 other people, they've generally figured out a much better use of space. For example, even way back during the Tokugawa period, 1600 to 1868, Japanese people used readily movable furniture instead of the heavy, permanent furniture favored by the West. This allowed for a more efficient use of limited space. That helps homeowners a lot when the average Japanese home is around 1,300 square feet, 120 square meters, compared to the average French house, which is almost 1,200 square feet, 111 square meters, and the average US house coming in at 2,400 square feet, about 220 square meters. Number 34, these densely populated urban centers made efficient public transportation a no-brainer. Japan was one of the first 10 countries in the world to develop a subway system, establishing the Ginza Line in Tokyo, connecting Asakusa and Ueno stations in 1927. Today, Shinjuku Station in central Tokyo retains the title of busiest subway station in the world, handling an average of 3.64 million passengers, just under the population of the city of Los Angeles, every single day. Tokyo's public transit system also ranks as 3rd best in the world, with 94% of over 20,000 respondents on a 2023 survey saying Tokyo is easy to navigate by public transport. Number 33. This benefit of dense urban centers also extends to the development of sanitation systems, which the country started implementing way back in the Tokugawa period, around 1603 onwards. Japanese sanitation systems of the era were often considered more advanced than those of Western cities. Advanced sanitation, coupled with Japan's isolation at the time, more on that later, helped its cities grow rapidly without the plague-like diseases that so often struck developing Western centers. Even so, Japanese cities still saw outbreaks of illnesses like smallpox. Fact 32. Japan is home to nearly 10% of the world's most innovative companies, and automation has become the country's safety net as its workforce shrinks. There are around 3 automated workers for every 100 people. Only Korea, Singapore, and Germany pack in more. But in Japan, these are more than just robots. Thanks to Shinto animist traditions, even tools are believed to hold a spirit. That makes the automated workers feel less like soulless equipment and more like metallic companions. In a nation with fewer young workers each year, it's a helping hand. People remain central to the process, and the automated employees take on repetitive, physical tasks, leaving humans free to focus on creativity, judgment, and the work machines can't do. Of course, being packed together on land is one thing, but in Japan, the real danger comes when the sea decides to join the crowd. Number 31. Tsunamis regularly slam into Japan's massive coastal cities, creating huge flooding risks. Many urban areas are caught between a flood and a landslide, more on those soon, while also hoping an earthquake or volcanic eruption doesn't join the party. And you thought your weather was bad. The country experiences at least one tsunami a year, with 143 tsunamis since 684 AD being responsible for the deaths of almost 131,000 people in total. Tohoku was unusually destructive, but the country regularly experiences strong quakes that still leave most buildings intact because of the building design they've adopted. Number 30. Because of Japan's intense earthquakes, architects and engineers build with seismic survival in mind, using base isolation, vibration control, and other techniques to keep structures, well, upright and in one piece when the ground starts doing its thing. Schools, for example, have extra fortified walls, not just to protect students, but because they often double as community evacuation centers during major quakes. And of course, a big playground helps when you suddenly need to host half the neighborhood. Number 29, in addition to anti-earthquake infrastructure and engineering, this has led to most Japanese homes being made of one of the most earthquake-resistant materials, wood. The comprehensive strength of wood is 9.5 times higher than concrete and double the strength of steel. Compared to steel and concrete, wood can reclaim its original state, while when steel and concrete collapse and break, they are mostly unsalvageable. Even modern structures of steel and concrete will blend wood into the design to make buildings more earthquake-proof, and 90% of single-family homes are made out of wood. Number 28. These earthquake adaptations aren't just because Japan sits on the Ring of Fire. With limited land for settlements, many of the country's biggest cities ended up on fault lines, because that's the land that was available. As you can imagine, this has caused a fair amount of devastation in the past. For example, the Great Earthquake of 1923 killed between 105 to 142,000 people and led to extensive damage in Tokyo and Yokohama, which ended up being mostly destroyed by fires. In fact, Tokyo, Yokohama, and Osaka are the cities nearest the Japanese fault lines, which is unfortunate as they're also the three most populous Japanese cities. Fact number 27. However, the infinite natural disasters waiting to happen have had some unexpected positive side effects. Japan's many volcanoes have produced fertile soils called andosols, so common that the term ando comes from Japanese, coined in 1949 to describe the volcanic earth found across the country. After a volcanic eruption, the rock and ash that settle on nearby plains are geologically young and rich in organic matter and minerals. Their unique structure also holds more water, making irrigation more efficient. Of course, it also means that farmers then have to live in the shadow of an active volcano. And that's far from their only problem. Fact 26. As if earthquakes and volcanoes weren't enough, Japan also sits under the East Asian monsoon. Winters turn cold and dry, summers swing hot and soggy, and some places drown in rain. Yakushima Island alone can see 394 inches, 1,000 centimeters per year. All that water slams into steep mountain slopes, turning hillsides into mudslides. Japan gets hit by 1,000 to 1,500 landslides every year. While they're mostly small, they can still be deadly. In 2021, Atami's streets turned into rivers of earth, burying homes and killing 27 people. For Japan, rainy season isn't just umbrellas, it's a rolling lottery of landslides. We're halfway through our Japanese geography facts, and so far we've covered mountains, more mountains, and earthquakes. Stick around, there's plenty more where that came from. Number 25. Japan lives with so many disasters that it's shaped the culture itself. Locals call it shoganai, which loosely means this might be awful, but we can't change it, so let's deal with it. It's not something that can be learned from a book. It's something you learn while rebuilding your house for the third time. When the 2011 Tohoku quake and tsunami wiped out entire coastal towns and triggered the Fukushima meltdown, 470,000 people were evacuated almost instantly. And within just over a decade, 400,000 were already back in rebuilt homes. Entire neighborhoods rose from the mud while most countries would still be arguing over permits. In Japan, the potholes get fixed after the apocalypse, while in other places, they barely get fixed after a rainy day. Fact 24. Disasters still pose a risk, and most of Japan's rivers make heavy rain and flooding worse. Their water levels rise and fall quickly, creating frequent floods. But in Japan's endless game of terrible thing, great thing courtesy of its geography, that rain has also fueled a crop crucial to the nation's development: rice. Though rice doesn't absolutely need flooded soils to be planted, it thrives in them in a way almost no other plants do, according to the American Society of Plant Biologists. This is partly because the flooding of rice paddies also controls the development of weeds in the fields. This made Japanese farmers very focused on rice growing, which, in addition to being the ingredient in most of your sushi rolls, was important for something else as well. Fact 23. Japan's suitability for rice cultivation allowed it to sustain far higher populations than expected, as rice is a staple crop capable of feeding large numbers of people efficiently. Because rice is calorie-dense, high in carbs, and relatively cheap, it's also one of the most relied upon foods for feeding and growing large populations. It accounts for 50% of the daily caloric intake in Asian populations today. As countries like Japan grow wealthier and can afford a wider variety of food, rice's share of the national diet naturally declines. Even so, it still accounts for 27% of Japan's total caloric intake, according to Science Direct. As a bonus, rice is also a great source of magnesium, phosphorus, manganese, selenium, iron, folic acid, thiamine, and niacin. Yum! Number 22, that being said, the cultivation of rice led to the establishment of a lot of settlements in flood-prone plains near the country's rivers. This has left 20% of the population living in areas at risk of flooding. In 2020, that translated to 25.94 million people living in flood zones, a 3% rise in the past decade. That's compared to a 1.5% decrease in Japan's general population. But more people are buying land in these areas because it's cheaper, for obvious reasons. Fact number 21. Japanese farmers often built right on floodplains, which forced them to get clever early. As far back as the Nara period in the 700s, they were throwing up levees and drainage channels to tame rivers that could rise and fall in a single day. That survival instinct never went away, it just scaled up. Today, Japan runs some of the most advanced flood defenses on Earth. North of Tokyo sits a colossal underground cathedral of concrete in Saitama Prefecture. 5 shafts, 213 feet 65 meters deep, connected by a 4-mile, 6.4-kilometer tube system. It can divert over 7,000 cubic feet, 200 cubic meters of floodwater per second into the Edo River. For comparison, that's roughly an Olympic swimming pool every 12 seconds, or like opening over 12,000 fire hoses at once just to keep Tokyo dry. Fact 20. Japan's rivers are a mixed blessing. Fed by steep mountains, they're short, shallow, and fast. More like whitewater rapids than the wide, lazy Mississippi. That means floods are common and navigation is basically impossible, cutting off rivers as a highway between cities. But what rivers denied, the sea provided. With countless natural harbors, Japan leaned hard into maritime trade, building ships instead of riverboats. By World War II, that strategy paid off. The Japanese Navy wasn't just the third largest in the world, it was arguably the most modern, while America was still floating battleships that looked like antiques. After World War II is a different story, but we'll get to that soon. Number 19, the other benefit of having small, rapidly moving rivers is being able to harness them for green energy, more specifically, hydropower. According to global data, hydropower accounted for 8% of Japan's total electricity generation in 2023, and 14% of its installed capacity. Compared to other countries, even those with plenty of rivers and water, that's a huge percentage. By comparison, hydropower provides 6% of US electricity and just 3% of Germany's. Not only is hydropower a great source of green energy, but it's also a great source of domestic energy, which is important for Japan because, number 18, once the world hit the industrial age, Japan found itself at a real disadvantage. You know how some natural resources have supercharged other countries' economies: petroleum, natural gas, and coal for energy, or iron ore and other minerals for manufacturing and exports. Japan has none of those. Well, almost none of those, but definitely not nearly any significant amount to support their now massive economy and population. The country is estimated to have 44 million barrels total in oil reserves, equivalent to the amount of oil Saudi Arabia produces every 4 days. That means Japan imports 87% of its energy, making it the world's second largest importer of natural gas, coal, and agricultural products. It's also the third largest importer of oil. Leading us to number 17, that pushed Japan to expand its nuclear program, and by 2010, nearly a quarter of its electricity came from domestic reactors. But just a year later, another of Japan's geographic hazards would shut down this source almost entirely. You guessed it, the massive 9.1 Richter Tohoku earthquake triggered a 49-foot, 15-meter tsunami. This caused a meltdown at Fukushima nuclear power plant, not to mention $300 billion in general damages. Fears of more meltdowns and public outcry shut down nearly all of Japan's nuclear plants, forcing the country back to heavy reliance on energy imports. As of 2023, only 5.5% of its power comes from nuclear power. Fact 16. In addition to being reliant on imports for energy, Japan's relative lack of arable land and focus on rice means it's also dependent on imports for food. According to the USDA, Japan is the world's third largest importer, largely due to its reliance on foreign meat, produce, and other foods, totaling nearly $50 billion, or 60% of its caloric intake, in 2010. It also imports significant agricultural goods such as rubber, along with half of its meat supply, since limited flat arable land means there are few large pastures for raising cattle and other livestock. Though those animals do exist in Japan, they don't produce enough meat to sustain the population. Number 15, however, needing so many imports and being unable to produce much energy or diverse food supplies of their own did have a hidden benefit. It motivated Japan to focus all its resources on developing its industrial sector. After World War II, the government pushed rapid manufacturing growth and built a strong export economy, focusing on what Japan could produce at scale to gain leverage in trade. Number 14, Japan's industrial boom turned it from a rice farming nation into an economic rocket in the 20th century. Steel, cars, and then consumer electronics poured out so fast that by the late 1960s, trade surpluses were practically routine. In the 2 decades after World War II, GDP often grew by 10% a year, numbers that would make even Silicon Valley jealous. Things have cooled since, but by the 1980s, Japan had vaulted into the ranks of high-income nations. Today, with a GDP over $4 trillion, it remains one of the world's largest economies. Proof that in a single generation, Japan jumped from ox carts to Toyotas, Walkmans, and skyscrapers faster than America managed in its entire Gilded Age. Fact number 13. The development of Japan as a major export hub was helped by its location as well. The island country is right on the path of some of the world's most popular trade routes, providing a gateway to East Asia. With its plentiful natural harbors, long coastline, and location on the Trans-Pacific route between North America and East Asia, Japan was well placed to become a trade hub. Fact number 12. Japan's dependence on imported energy comes with a big catch. It all has to squeeze through choke points like the South China Sea and the Strait of Malacca. If a rival ever blocked that route, Japan's economy would grind to a halt overnight. For now, the US Navy keeps those lanes open, but as Washington looks inward and alliances wobble, Japan may have to lean on its own muscle. Luckily, it has one of the most advanced navies on Earth, and when it comes to keeping enemies out, geography itself provides an even bigger shield. Fact number 11. Japan's greatest defense has always been geography. It's not just an island. It's an island sitting 497 miles, 800 kilometers away from China with an open ocean between. Then there's the mountains waiting to grind any invasion to a halt. Compared to its nearest neighbor, South Korea, Japan has the clear edge in size, population, and military power. That natural fortress explains why Japan has almost never been successfully invaded. Even the Mongol Empire, the most powerful war machine of its time, tried twice in the 1200s and failed both times. The only real exception came after World War II, when the US occupied Japan, but only after dropping 2 atomic bombs, because a conventional invasion would have cost millions of lives. We're down to the top 10 reasons why Japan's geography works. What surprised you most so far? And don't say mountains. Fact number 10. Thanks to its island geography and location in the Pacific, Japan enjoys a milder climate than many places at the same latitude. The surrounding sea moderates temperatures, a difference you'll notice if you've spent a winter in Seoul and then one in Tokyo. In January, winter temperatures in Tokyo range, on average, from 41 to 49 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 to 9.5 degrees Celsius, while in nearby Seoul, they range between 20 and 35 degrees, negative 6.6 to 1.6 degrees Celsius. Another feature of Japan's climate also helped it repel outside invaders. Fact number 9. When Kublai Khan launched Mongol invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281, they failed partly due to fierce Japanese resistance and partly because both times typhoons blew in and absolutely wrecked the Mongol fleet. The Japanese saw these typhoons as divine intervention, naming them kamikaze winds. But the strength of the Japanese army shouldn't be overlooked. In fact, Japan's current reputation as the home of anime, Nintendo, and cherry blossoms has somewhat obscured its extremely aggressive military history, as you'll soon see. Fact number 8. This relative isolation and lack of invasions have also influenced business culture and the fact that multiple Japanese businesses go back hundreds of years. There's even a specific word in Japanese for businesses over 100 years old, shinise. Japan is home to 140 businesses over 500 years old, and at least 19 that have operated for more than a millennium. That's older than most countries, and probably some gas station hot dogs. Fact number 7. Japan's easy-to-defend position and constant need for external resources have led it to go rogue more than once, attacking multiple neighbors at the same time. Because, like a petulant toddler, if you can't trade for what you want, you just take it. In the run-up to World War II, Japan went on a conquest spree, taking Taiwan and Manchuria from China, Korea, and Germany's South Pacific Islands. Then, for good measure and plenty of natural resources, they invaded China itself, followed by Indonesia and the Philippines. Before long, they joined the rest of the world in a little skirmish we now call World War II. Fact number 6. Though World War II ended a long time ago, you may be surprised to hear that technically Japan and Russia are still at war. That's right, the two powers never signed a peace treaty at the end of the war because of a dispute over the Kuril Islands, northeast of Hokkaido. Japan claims this stretch of islands as their own, Russia says niet, and the issue remains unresolved. The islands are important to both countries because not only are the waters around them absolutely teeming with fish, but they're also located in an important strategic position. They provide Russia with easy access to the Pacific Ocean, as well as options for military bases and missile systems closer to Japan. Number 5. Before industrialization, Japan didn't need much from the outside world, so it chose the opposite of conquest: total isolation. For centuries, the country swung between invading your neighbors or slamming the doors shut. From 1639 to 1853, during the era of Sakoku, or locked country, foreign nationals were banned, and Japanese who left faced death if they tried to return. The shogunate wanted to shield its people from outside influence, especially Christianity pushed by Spain and Portugal. Only China, Korea, and a carefully supervised Dutch outpost were allowed in, as long as the Dutch stuck to trade and kept religion out of it. The policy worked. It preserved Shinto and kept Western culture at bay. But it also left Japan lagging behind, creating problems that came roaring back once the rest of the world showed up with steamships and cannons. Fact number 4. While it's unfair to say that previous isolationism is the only reason behind Japan's emphasis on ethnic homogeneity, it definitely is one of several factors. And that has kept Japan's historic immigration policies relatively strict, even though they have started opening up recently. Today, up to 2.96% of the Japanese population is foreign, below the world average of 3.6%. And it's way below the average in OECD countries, which is closer to 14.7%. On one hand, every country has the right to set its own immigration policy. On the other, Japan faces a major problem, one its reluctance toward immigration is only making worse. Fact number 3. Japan's biggest crisis isn't an earthquake or tsunami. It's demographics. Birth rates have collapsed to 1.15, barely half of what's needed to keep the population stable. At the same time, people are living longer than almost anywhere else, over 84 years on average. This means that nearly a third of Japan is already over 65, and more than 10% are 80 or older. That leaves too few young workers to carry too many retirees. In 1970, 5 workers supported each retiree. By 2025, it's just 2, and by 2050, it'll be 1 to 1. A pension system hanging by a thread. European countries face similar issues, but many offset them with immigration. Japan's strict policies means there's no backup plan. Fact number 2. The increased labor shortage in Japan due to the aging population contributes to a culture of overwork. Overtime is expected, and even sometimes written into company contracts. In 2022, Japan's health ministry found that 10.1% of men and 4.2% of women worked over 60 hours a week. This leads to a host of health problems known as karoshi, death by overworking. Workers will develop strokes, cardiac arrest, and myocardial infarctions primarily caused by exhausting, overly long work hours. And finally, fact number 1. Housing in Japan is another stress test. Prices are steep thanks to dense cities and strict building codes designed for earthquakes and typhoons. But unlike in the US, where a home is often seen as a lifelong investment, Japanese houses lose value fast. Within 30 years, most are worth almost nothing. As Penn State's Jiro Yoshida puts it, the half-life of a Japanese home is just 38 years. In the US, it's closer to 100. That's why half of all Japanese homes are torn down before they even hit middle age, making housing feel more like a car purchase than a retirement plan. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.